Right, Kira. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you very much that you all are here. It's full on, it's standing room only. That's a better outcome that I had anticipated. Fantastic. So we start on time because we're full on schedule. And as we do with events like this, we will start with a karakia. And the karakia today will be presented to us by students from Mercury Bay Area School from room M10. Kia ora, guys.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Ko moi hau taku maunga, ko whanganui o hei taku moana, ko tapu tapu ate taku awa, ko Scott taku matua, ko Denise taku mama, ko te kura o te whanganui o hei taku kura, ko Alfie taku ingoa. My name is Alfie Harris, I am 9 years old.
Ko moi hau taku maunga, ko tikapa te moana, ko Vandy taku matua, ko Candace taku whaia, ko te kura o te whanganui a hei taku kura, no whirianga aho ko Libby taku ingoa. My name is Libby Vanderven, I am 9 years old.
Ko mai hau taku maunga, ko whanganui o hei taku moana, ko tapu tapu atia taku awa, ko Grant taku matua, ko Adele taku whaia, ko te kura o te whanganui o hei taku kura. Ko Thomas taku ingoa, my name is Thomas Scobie, I'm 9 years old.
Mā te whakapono,
Mā te tūmanako, mā te titiro, mā te whakarongo, mā te mahitahi, mā te manuanui, mā te aroha, ka taia e au. Tihei mauri ora. We're from a year 5 and 6 class at Mercury Bay Area School. This year our class has been focused on learning about teacup moana, its creatures and the issues it faces. We are here today to inspire you to take care of our local moana and its creatures. We asked the students in our class what their wishes were for our local moana. They wrote,
We want to have a healthy moana so that the future generations can continue to enjoy it as much as we do. Nila, age 10. We want to be able to take our children fishing. Sasha, age 10. When we are older, we want to be able to go out and catch kai moana for our family to eat. Nia, age 9.
We want the Kiwi tradition of fish and chips at the beach to continue. Leah, age 9. We want the small Ika to be able to grow up and have their own babies. Zachary, age 9. We want to have healthy reefs and all other creatures. Mia, age 9.
We want less sea creatures to go extinct. Claudia, age 10. We want our kids to have the experiences in and on the moana that we have had. Gray, age 11. We want to be able to go diving in a clean ocean where we can see many different sea creatures living a happy life. Sophie, age 9.
Mā whero, mā pongo, ka ote te mahi. With red and black the work will be completed. With blood and tears the work will be completed. Let's work together, let's share our knowledge, and together we can look after and restore our local moana. Thank you, Mr. Everett, for letting us open the conference.
Kira, thank you very much, Room 10. That was fantastic. Thank you so much for opening for us. There are a few more places to sort of sit on the ground up front here if people still want to mingle forward or someone and just sit here or so. That might be helpful. We might be overloading the room a little bit, but I'm sure the concrete floor will do good. So let me just... Sam, can you put the... Right, cool. So a few housekeeping things to start with. Oh, Sam. Again, doesn't work. I have a few technical glitches with the presentation thingy here. How about I put some new batteries in? Give us a minute.
Housekeeping. Yeah, housekeeping.
Yeah, sorry. Sorry, Joe, I had a few words to say before we start. And unless you want to start another karaoke or something? You want to? No, okay. Oh, okay, sorry.
The kids have said it all.
Yeah, that's right.
I don't know why I'm standing up here.
I don't know. Well, I was just fiddling with the batteries. I mean, very good. Okay, so a couple of words to start us out with. First of all, some housekeeping stuff. We have... I will just give me the next slide. Used to work a while ago. It's not painful. Can you duplicating? Now duplicate the screen. You're projecting your. Anyway. Sorry, we had it all. There we go. There we go. Pam? All right. Give us 1 minute. We'll sort it out.
Forum's in a good place. Forum's going great.
You've got Joe on board now.
Isn't that fantastic?
Who's your chair now?
It is Nicola McDonald, Ngāti Rehua, and Pippa Coombe, the Auckland Council. So I've got co-chairs now. Yeah, but it's great to get Joe. Really important.
This one over here.
Yeah. Right, so hopefully now we can proceed. So first of all, today is not just this wonderful event here, we also have the World Environment Day today. It's a coincidence that we just worked out a few days ago that it was. So World Environment Day, re-image, recreate, restore. The motto is probably quite befitting. So a couple of housekeeping things. COVID is still an issue. If you manage to sign in on the way in, that's great. If you haven't yet, you can still sign in on the way out or in the break that we're going to have. A couple of things. So we have audience participants today. We have so many people here that we decided that we do high-tech. So there is on the little handouts that you see, or if you haven't got a handout, if you go to meet.ps/ocean on your phone, if you have a phone, you can come to a site where you can enter your name and an email address, and then you can ask questions, and the questions will pop up on an iPad up here. And later on in the panel discussion, they will be fed to the panel chair for answering. That's quite cool. First of all, we also have some paper questions that you can do. You can walk up to the desk and ask and put your questions on paper there. They will also be handed to the presenter in the panel, the chair, and you also have a wall in the back there, behind the people there, where you can put suggestions or ideas on little post-it notes. We also made a Facebook group where we can, after this event, get together and share things, like the presentation of this day will be streamed and will be filmed and will be on there as well, and further on discussions or connections to be made in the future can be made on this page. Cool, this is briefly the layout of the event, so it's quite full on. We have a number of wonderful speakers. I will not introduce them right now, but you will meet them when they begin. And followed by a break of about 15 minutes to mingle around and chat and maybe post some questions. Followed by a panel discussion, which will be, again, with the speakers and additional people from that come to join us here, Mike Barner from Legacy and Oliver Wilson and Daryl Bird from Dive Zone, if he managed to get here. And so that's the layout of this day, quite full on. So briefly, why this event? I'll put it this way. This event could be framed in 3 words: rights, entitlements, and obligations. And I'll make clear to you in a minute why this hangs together. We often hear that people think like everything is normal. We go out there and we catch some fish on the bay, and we do it tomorrow again, and everything seems to be pretty normal. And people say we have a normal day fishing. What's the point of all this protection talk? But normality is a matter of perspective. And I'll put this perspective to you now and watch. So every single day you wake up in the morning is not a normal day. Because when you see here on a time scale of 10,000 years, from minus 8,000 up to now, the human population going up to about 7 billion right now. So that is not a normal day that you're living today. You're actually attached to the vertical cliff face of the human tsunami that's ripping through this planet. And on a scale of normal was about here last time, maybe during the time maybe when Kupe and Cook met in this bay back in the day. That's when things were sort of normal. Your entire life was lived in the not normal space, and that's kind of scary, isn't it? And we wonder then what our impact will do to the environment. And one of the impacts, of course, is that we see that the wild animals in the world are shrinking rapidly. Here indicated with some fish species also. Many studies show that the biomass of life of the wild animals, particularly also sea life, is going down rapidly. And so the question then arises, what will be the future like? Can this continue? Can this even continue a little bit longer, this trajectory? What will happen? What will happen for our future? And there is a French philosopher, Simone Weil, I recommend her. She has said, a right is not effectual in itself, but only in relation to the obligation to which it corresponds. And you can apply that in almost all contexts. You can apply that in the context of free speech, or in the context of going out and catch a fish, etc., right? Your right, your perceived right and entitlement must come with a greater obligation in which you have to see this right. And for us, of course, it's the obligation to care for the planet and care for the place that we go out and fish in. That's the obligation that we have. And I'll leave you here and then pass over to Joe in a minute. I believe that when you contrast 2 worldviews here, that's sort of the humanist Pākehā worldview. We are on top of everything, we control the world. We can land rockets backwards. We're fantastic, right? Yet over here, this is the indigenous perspective of the world. You are a small part of a much larger web of life. You have to play a role in keeping this web of life healthy, and then it will support you. And I think when you listen carefully in the rumor in the world right now, I think we're going towards reconnecting ourselves with being indigenous to this planet and no longer being dominant over it, because that didn't work out too well, I think. With this, I pass it over to Matutu Davis, who has been very inspirational in this whole area of conservation, just lately with the scallop rahui that he probably will talk to us more about. Kia ora.
Yeah, kia ora, Thomas. Thank you for that marvellous introduction. And I thank our tamariki for our karakia. As I said before, I think they've summed it up pretty much, really. I thank them very much. And, of course, it's about them at the end of the day. For us, it's about our mokopuna. It's about us leaving behind a better world for them in better condition. And hopefully, well, not hopefully, we have to. It's a legacy that we're all going to be responsible for, especially us in this current generation, and to leave behind. And I picked up what the kids said about more extinctions happening, and that is very, very true. And I thank you again, Tamariki Mā, for your kind karakia for us this afternoon. Nā reira, ka mihi atu kia koutou. Mihi atu, ka tai mai mātou konei rā, I runga te hakaronga me ngā kōrero tia e pāna ki tātou kaupapa mo te mokapuna o Tangaroa. Mātou konei, e hi ana te ora o tātou moana, o tātou whanga, o tātou awa, o tātou roto, e pāna ki tātou mahi a tātou e nei mo te tangata katoa kei konei. Nō reira, ka mihi atu kia koutou. Mihi ana Kia koe anō Thomas. Kia koe te pauhere mō tātou i te ahi nei. Koutou mai i ngā kōrero tia he keiko nei. Tātou katoa. Kia koe Scott. Good to see you here. Of course Trish. I can see you there. She's keeping an eye on me. Trish, going to keep me honest tonight. Kia ora. Kia ora mō tēnā. Dirk. Kamihi atu kia koe koutou mā. Tēnā koutou te whare nei. Tēnā koutou. Tēnā koutou. Tēnā koutou katoa. And so, also, while we're here, I'm here thanking everybody, of course, C3, the organisation, for allowing us, for booking us in so early. I think, Thomas, it started off, I think, at the little theatre down the road. Now it's ballooned into this. And so I thank that C3 organisation for providing us with a wonderful venue. And of course, you who are here today, who's made the effort to come here and to maybe ask some very pertinent questions later on after you've heard what we've got to say. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce myself, my background. I am of Hei of Hauraki. I bear the name Joseph John Davis. I'm the fourth after my grandfather Hohepa Mataitau Rewiti. He was, of course, tuakana of Hei, of Wharekaho. He was named after the Ngāi Tiniro Hei Waitaha Ngāti Tuhukea Chief Hohepa Mataitaua of Tuhukea, of Hei, of Ngāti Karaua. My grandfather had two older siblings, but they perished in the flu epidemic, the Spanish flu epidemic in 1918 up in Tamaki Makaurau in Auckland. They didn't have a shoe and were lost to the Māori myriads of the urban and Auckland city migrations in the early 1900s. My Pākehā side, of course, who I'm very proud of. My Pākehā side, from whom I bear the name Davis. He was a name of proud Irish descent. I'm particularly proud of him. My ancestor Charles Oliver Bond Davis, or C.O. Davis as he was known. He was a writer, a poet, a lay minister, and a general assistant to Māori. Was present at the Treaty of Waitangi as a young 20-year-old. And he assisted with the writing of the treaty, believe it or not, with Hobson and him at the time. He also was brought into New Zealand, the first Māori newspaper, of course, and started to churn out small but a small newspaper and to keep the chiefs here in Waikato, Tainui, and of course up in Ngāpuhi, keep them well informed of things as they were developing back then. It was quite a political and tumultuous time for them. And he can be found on the internet as well. There's got screeds written about that particular man. His parents, of course, were Irish political prisoners as a result of a revolt against the English hegemony and locked up in the prison hulks on the Thames River in London. So I proudly bear the manacles of the Australian convict colonies over there, where my ancestors lived underneath the harbour bridge over there down a place called the Rocks, all those of you familiar with Sydney. And I'm very proud of that side of my family as well. So I thought I'd pull that one out of the closet for you. And today, of course, and I'd like to think this is an inaugural hui, first of many, not just about fish, but also about other subjects as well, and topics pertinent to the New Zealand politic of the day and what's going on in Scott. You might be a feature up here one day yourself, and cover part of the 2-year project when we first started it back 2019, 2018. Correct me if I'm wrong, John. I was encouraging that we have this sort of thing. I think Whitianga, it would suit Whitianga to have debates and kōrero and hui such as this to debate the topics of the day. Because this is a special place here, Whitianga, especially Wharekaho, and Purangi, because Cook landed here in November of 1769, and it was our whānau or our iwi that welcomed, at the first pōhiri here in New Zealand, and welcomed Cook and his officers and his crew aboard, ashore, and of course the handing over of the first potatoes. So that was there's a whole lot of significant events that happened that day. Of course, we celebrated back in 2019, of course, and I sort of felt that that Ngāti Hei at least should start such a kaupapa such as this. And Thomas, you know, credit to you, sir, for your for having opened it up really with a whole bunch of people. I'm sure behind the scenes there's a whole lot of people involved in the setup and the discussions that we're going to have tonight. So thanks again, Thomas. To encourage public discussion, thoughts, and into what we described as coming, well, tonight we're going to come face to face with the state of our oceans and our harbours, really, and all that which is connected to our oceans and harbours. I do consider myself a naturalist, not a naturist, not to be confused with a naturist. I'm not akin to running around in my birthday suit, and so this is not a new topic, of course, what we're going to be talking about tonight, not by any means. It has been a topic around our own Ngāti Hei kouta, or around our cooking fires for at least 150 years. We have watched and to a degree naively participated in the relentless pursuits of settlers and land agents and the extractive exploitation of Aotearoa's natural resources. This phenomenon, of course, has escalated amongst the Anglo-European industrial revolutions of the mid-1800s. For example, Coromandel virtually built San Francisco, the 7 hills of San Francisco. All those houses you see on the movies and that, well, they're from Coromandel, Cody. And when Lieutenant James Cook came to our marae in Wharekaho, 1769, on a scientific reconnaissance, there would have been no comprehension by either him or us that we had now entered into what is coined today as the global economy. We're about to be exported all around the world. Māori were about to be hurled into this era of exploitation, this social and tribal upheavals, loss of lands and customs, etc. Cook virtually raised the English flag, plotted Aotearoa's whereabouts, and then proclaimed Aotearoa for king and country. Terra nullis. The rest, of course, is history. The 3 big impact dates for Ngāti Hei, of course, was Cook's arrival in 1769, Hongi Hika around 1812, 1815, and of course the signing of the Treaty of Waitangi in 1840. But what is most important to Ngāti Hei is the apology from the Crown. That apology, well, it did. We had a well-founded claim. They apologised to us for all the things they'd done, and in a small way, we've accepted the redress package that they've offered us. I don't think Aotearoa could afford to really compensate Māori for their losses. We couldn't. We'd be all working and paying taxes for the rest of our lives, and probably into the next generation, The key to it, of course, is us now working collaboratively together with our treaty partners. The key to it is working together on projects like this, or kaupapa such as this, that is going to be for our mokopuna from now and into the future. The causes and effects. Today, the extractive industrial exploitation still exists. If we look at development, especially coastal development, which is the first cousin of capitalism, which is the first cousin of democracy, all are flawed. However, it is the world we live in. We are a very fortunate country to be living in. We've come through the COVID crisis. We still do have an economy, quite a strong one compared to the rest of the world. When you look what's going on around the world, we're doing pretty good. We're doing pretty good. None of us here are wearing masks tonight. None of us wearing spaced apart 1 meter and all this sort of thing. You know, there's 3,000 Indians dying, I don't know, a week. The New Yorkers have you know, they're still trying to get over what they're trying to get over. LA's practically drained out of their population. You know, it's and here we are living this life. And we're so very, very fortunate, you know. But on the other hand, Māori have learned your language. We've adapted but not necessarily accepted European worldviews. We love technology. And we accept the sciences but are not limited to it. Māori are graduating in droves from within academia, law, anthropology, health sciences. Our treaty settlements commercially are based on current market economic systems, etc. So we are very cognizant of what's going on around us politically, economically, environmentally, and also with its effects, which is what we will be talking about tonight. Māori know that of the mai of both Tangaroa and Papa, and we've known this for a long time. Through research, we know the petrel tricks mortality rates are very high, and they're virtually dying of starvation outside their burrows. And I'm talking about Ohino, and I'm talking about Little Ohino, Red Merk. I'm talking about all the islands out there. I don't think you have any at all on Great Mercury, Michael. The grey face and the petrels, the sooty shearwaters. There's been a lot of research going on out there. Our chicks are loaded, all our birds are loaded with, they can dive up to 60 metres, or 30 metres, sorry, and they're loaded with mercury and elements and chemicals out there. Landcare research has advised, well, they're our, when I say petrels, grey face, sooties and that, the slang name for them is mutton birds. And we haven't harvested probably in the last 50 years. We don't intend to until those numbers come back. As a matter of fact, I don't think we'll probably be harvesting for the next 30 years or 40 years until those manu come back, until we get the mauri back of those manu. But we know the mamai. Through research, we know the petrel chicks' mortality rates are high. The chicks are dying outside their burrows because the parents can't come home and give them the kai they used to have once. They have to go further and further afield. The parent birds fly over the Kermadex, go up in the Queensland, come down the New South Wales, down the east coast of Australia, across to Tasmania, and then back again, back to Aotearoa. The chicks from the South Island, the Stewart Island birds, sorry, they go to North America, and they fly up the east coast of North America, come across and back to, and that's their feeding patterns. Those are their feeding patterns, and those sardines and the small herrings that they chase just aren't there anymore. They're just not there. You know, the bigger fish, of course, chase up the boil-ups to the surface. It's a whole chain reaction from the bottom to the top, and they're just not pushing those fish up to the surface for the birds to be able to dive down and feed upon. So there's all that going on out there. Off the community of South Australia, we know that the scallop wash-ups don't happen anymore. It was a natural way of having access to that kaimoana, which is very rare these days, very hard to get. And we're totally reliant on either purchasing them outright or someone's lucky enough to have a boat to be able to go out there and get them. These are Tangaroa's gifts to us. However, the mauri of those gifts are now are almost non-existent. As Tangaroa was saying, Tangaroa says to us, you are not looking after the garden as you should be. Do you think you really deserve it? And I would have to admit, You know, we've turned the Ferrari into a lawnmower. And do we deserve it? I beg to. I don't think so. I don't think so. If you don't look after, another way of looking at Māori is if you don't look after it, you lose it. Right? If someone else thinks you're not looking after it, that person will take it off you. That's a very tribal way of looking at things. And I would like to think that we are going to do the best we can to revive that fishery, to restore it, and to create more abundance. And it's going to take a while, but we've got to start somewhere. You've got to take the small step for the big journey. And so another point that grates me too is technology. We know as technology gets more sophisticated, portable and more accessible and more affordable, it gives us apex predators a huge advantage over the fish and other species. Their technology is, well, they don't have a technology. They just remain the same. However, we as humans, we develop and grow. We've got this wonderful thing called the internet now. You've got Elon Musk. He's going to send 500 satellites up into the air. You've got a whole, you've got, we fill the atmosphere with bandwidth, with lasers, with sonar pings under the water. We've got 5G just around the corner. And so what do those effects have on our migrating birds that rely on sonar? They rely on their natural type radar to be able to get back to their burrows, or the whale that relies on their own pings and calls through the oceans. What do we, how do we work that one out? It upsets their feeding patterns. We know that. The whale, pelagic fish, the sharks, they all rely on natural sonar. And those sorts of technology we desperately need ourselves as human beings, and we love. And the exploitation now, we can go and pick the fish we want with a drone. You send a drone out. I don't want that one, but I'll take that one. This sort of thing. It's not the sport has gone out of it now. It's a technological thing. The catalyst to begin to address such inconvenient truths, and I cite Al Gore there, has been probably the scallop rahui. And I knew that was going to come with pluses and minuses for everybody. November last year, of course, it was decided to put a voluntary rahui on the Ōpito Bay fishery, which I add is still in train. It is now a time of information gathering and analysing of the there's analysing of 2,500 submissions, and of course the continuous and constant pressure by groups on the ministry to reach a conclusion in support of the rahui, and to ultimately end the extraction of the destruction on the of bottom trawling and dredging. And that progress, and there's a lot of work ahead of us yet. I'm very aware of our commercial fishers. I'm very aware because we're part of that. I'm on the Hauraki Māori Trust Board and Pari Hauraki Fisheries Trust, and we direct our asset holding company to do this and that. And now it affects us commercially as well, because all our marae and hauraki rely on grants that come out of the trust board, which comes out of the TACs, the total area catches that come off quota, and etc. So but it's not very much for us, for the trust board. It's probably the total figure coming out of the trust board is probably 30,000 a year, which is a small, tiny, little nothing profit gain for something that our kids have described to us this evening that could become extinct in the next 4 or 5 years if we don't do something about it. So that's pretty well much from me. I see Thomas standing there. In other words, your 10 minutes is up, boy. You better keep going. So I thank you all for I hope I didn't bore you too much. But just to give you as an opening sort of stanza in terms of the iwi o Ngāti Hei perspective on things. And ka mihi atu ki au koutou. And I'll finish with a little saying, Thomas. Mā te pūpoke i ahu, ka hua te mahara, ka hua te wānanga, āti hei mauri ora. From first comes the thought. From the thought comes the kōrero. From the kōrero comes the mahi, or the work, which is what we're in here now doing. And from the mahi, we go out and we teach. We go out and we teach others. And we hope that the rest of Aotearoa learns from this experience that we've started at Ōpito. And they certainly have. It's gone up the coastline to and, I thought you cut me off. Up to Waiheke, now the northern iwi, of course, are joining in, and now I'm hearing the other iwi have to come in. It's like squeezing the balloon. It's going to, you squeeze it there, it pops out another place. So they're now making inquiries about what they should do. So thank you, Thomas. Thank you, everybody. Ka mihi atu ki au koutou.
Kia ora, Joe. Thank you. Thank you very much for this corridor. Thank you very, very much. So next up on our speakers list is Alex Rogers from Hauraki Gulf Forum. He is the executive officer of the Hauraki Gulf Forum. He also brought some wonderful booklets along. Some of you may have been lucky enough to grab one. Otherwise, they're downloadable from his website. So with no further ado, Alex Rogers. This is the ticker for your slides. And there are the slides coming up.
Kia ora tātou, ko Alex Rogers tōku ingoa, he kai whakahaere Hauraki Gulf Forum. Nā mihi Joe, nā mihi Ngāti hei, mana whenua ki wharekahu, ki Whitianga. It's a great pleasure to be with you this afternoon. Thanks so much for coming out on a Saturday afternoon, on a long weekend. Special thanks to the kids that are here with us today. I've got a 7-year-old and a 10-year-old myself, and it's beautiful to see the clarity that children can provide to a debate like this. Thank you. I'm quite tall. I'm going to give you the 10-second version, and then I'll give you the 5-minute version of the state of our Gulf. The 10-second version is this: we are taking too much out of it, and we are putting too much bad stuff back into it. The slightly longer version starts with this headline for me, and you won't be able to see it, so I'll read it out. It says, "We used to be leaders, the collapse of New Zealand's landmark ocean park." That was the headline in The Guardian. It was actually the #1 story worldwide at the point at which it was released early last year. And it's a headline which I find pretty upsetting, and I think should annoy all New Zealanders. We're not followers down here, we're leaders. And the collapse of our landmark ocean park refers to the Hauraki Gulf Marine Park. And I just want to be clear as I step into this what I mean when I say the Gulf, because people have different definitions of the Gulf. When we talk about the Gulf, this is what we're talking about, that entire dark blue marine area up there on the screen. It's the water boundary, the 12 nautical mile boundary of the Auckland and Waikato regions. And as you can see, the Coromandel is right at its heart. The Coromandel has by far the longest coastline in the Hauraki Gulf Marine Park. And that grey shaded area is how far the catchment goes. The water that flows into the Gulf comes from almost as far south as Rotorua. And I just want to also be clear up front who I represent here today. So I represent the Hauraki Gulf Forum. It's a statutory board established under the Marine Park Act. And there's a couple of familiar faces on that screen there. I'm sorry, I know it's not that big and you're a big audience. But Joe is one of our members, so we have 21 board members. 6 represent the interests of tangata whenua right around the Hauraki Gulf. Joe's one of those representatives. We've got 12 local politicians, including Dennis Tegg, who's here with us again on stage today, and representatives of 3 ministers of the Crown, Minister of Conservation, Oceans and Fisheries, and Māori Development. Probably our most important task is this, and this is a task we're given under law, is that every 3 years we produce a comprehensive state of the environment report on the Hauraki Gulf. And as Thomas said, there's some copies of the summary at the door. Please do get one on your way out. But the story is not a great one at the moment. The story is that the Gulf does suffer from the pressure that we all put on it. It suffers from the amount of fishing we do, but also how we do that fishing. It suffers from the amount of plastic, the amount of sediment, the amount of nutrients that washes out into it. Just the other day, you might have seen that story about how 25%, a quarter of fish in the Gulf have plastic in their guts. That should alarm all of us. And that plastic is increasingly getting so small that it makes its way into their tissue. And guess who eats their tissue? So the Gulf is really suffering from a huge amount of pressures, and it's complex, and they're big things, and not easily solved. But we don't have to go back that far to remember just how good it was. This was a fairly average day on the floor of the Sandford fish yard in Thames in 1905. 18,000 fish on that floor that day. Big, fat, healthy, good-looking fish. That's just over 100 years ago. That's the kind of abundance that the Gulf had. Now, too much of it looks like this. For those of you that put your head under the water, that'll be pretty familiar. It's a kinnibarron. It's basically a sign of an ecosystem out of whack. Kinna are fine, they're tasty. They're endemic to the Gulf. They belong here. But they are rampaging through kelp beds at the moment because we no longer have the predators to keep them in check. We no longer have the same amount of big fish that we used to have, and crayfish as well, which are really important parts of the ecosystem in keeping the kinna in check. So instead, the kinna do what they've got to do, find food, and they end up eating through our kelp beds. And that, of course, destroys a lot of the habitat that the fish need in their juvenile stage, so you start to see things break down. The good news is that it's not all like that. This photo is also from the Gulf. That's from Tawharanui. It's a protected part of the Gulf in North Auckland. And it's a couple of big healthy kota, crayfish there, beautiful sponges on that reef, whole lot of marine biodiversity there. And the Gulf can look all like that one day again. It can be that pataka kai that used to provide for Ngāti Hei, for mana whenua, for communities right around this beautiful coastline. So that's where we want to get back to. And well, you think it's actually not that tricky to get back there. You've just got to do a few simple things and you've got to do them well. The first thing you've got to do is leave more of it alone. Nature is really good at healing itself when given the opportunity. So from the forum side, we have called for 30% of the Gulf to be protected. Now, we're pretty relaxed about how that happens, whether that's through Rahui, through Mataitai and Taiapuri areas, through fishery closures, through marine reserves. But the point is that we need a whole lot more protection than we have now. The second thing is that it's really important that we start restoring the seafloor. I would have loved to have been alive back when we had these, but we used to have over 1,000 square kilometres of mussel beds in the Gulf. 1,000 square kilometres. And they used to filter the entire water of the Gulf multiple times a day. It was crystal clear. And they, of course, provided that basis for the whole ecosystem out there. But we went and dredged them all out. And so there's only a few left these days. But at the forum level, we are advocating to return us back to that abundance on the seafloor. The third thing is something that's happening in a lot of places at the moment, and this is a really good story, is the amount of planting going on. It's awesome to see the amount of planting going on around the region. The more that we can plant up our waterways, the riparian edges, the less that's going to get through from us into the Gulf. And finally, the other thing that we would love to see, the fourth thing, is an end to marine dumping. There's still marine dumping that goes on, some of it not too far off this coastline here. And that is another thing that we think will be important to returning the Gulf to its full health. So that's enough from me. Maybe I've caught you up a bit of time, Thomas. And I'll hand it back to the other speakers. Thank you.
Pass me there we go. Thank you very much, Alex. And next up is Alison Henry to explain to us the Sea Change organization, which together, or as part of the Hauraki Gulf Forum, has been active in that space. Kia ora, Alison.
Kia ora, Thomas.
And we have a slide for you there as well when that comes up.
Just one.
Yeah, just one. So we'll just cut. Thank you.
Kia ora tato, everybody, and warmest welcome on coming out here, as Alex said, on a day that is part of your holiday, so long weekend. So it's great to see so many people, and I think that it says a huge amount about looking after our Gulf. Kia ora, Joe, my fellow traveller along the Sea Change journey, and Alex, of course. Sea Change fell out of what Alex has already referred to with the State of the Gulf reports. The key indicators in those reports were showing a steady decline in all the key indicators, and a marine spatial plan was called for. And that was it. The Sea Change Hauraki Gulf Marine Spatial Plan. And that spatial plan is actually intended as a guide for the future of the Hauraki Gulf. Now, who sat around this table? Who created that plan? There was a group of 14 people selected from numerous community meetings. Those 14 people included 4 from Mana Whenua, and we were all from very different backgrounds. There were commercial fishermen, there were recreational fishermen, there were business people, there were environmentalists. And our task was to come up with a marine spatial plan through cooperation, collaboration, and it was intended, as this was not a statutory plan, that we were not confined by statutory obligations. We came together as a group, and then what was our first task? Our first task was to say we need to listen to the community. So we had what we called listening posts dotted all around the Hauraki Gulf, where we listened to people and gathered from them information, their local observations, their memories, and their aspirations. Out of that community, those community groups, we synthesized all that information into 5 topics, 5 main topics to be the underlying themes for the spatial plan. And these were fish stocks, water quality, biodiversity and biosecurity, aquaculture, and infrastructure and access. And these roundtables, as I say, they became groups of their own. Each topic had its own group, with a group of people leading it, who then called in more expert advice. They had scientists, they had people schooling them in Mātauranga Māori. There was citizen science, there was citizens' experiences, and all this was from people who work, play, and live in and around the Hauraki Gulf. These reports from all these groups illustrated the absolutely astounding amount of knowledge that there is about the Gulf stored in our institutions and in our communities. We know an awful lot about the Hauraki Gulf, and Alex will be the first one to tell you that what we know is not good. To ignore this Sea Change report is to ignore a remarkable compilation of information about our Gulf that has ever been gathered. And to ignore this information, I think, would be totally disrespectful. Important findings from our spatial plan discussions, the most important of all is that there is no silver bullet to fixing the Hauraki Gulf. There is no one issue, because everything is interconnected, and we've seen that from Alex's slides. Sedimentation came out as a major concern, and that sedimentation is from everything that we do, from urban use, from farming, from forestry, anything that disturbs the land or any land use affect the Hauraki Gulf. Overfishing. Well, just to give you an example, if you take out, and that's, you stole my thunder. Take out the big crayfish and the big snapper, you're left with kinner barrens. Kinner that chomp through the kelp, you're left without the habitat, and so the cascade of disaster continues. The loss of biodiversity from benthic disturbance from trawling really illustrates the pressing need that we have for marine protection. We've got to protect our key areas throughout the Hauraki Gulf, and particularly here in our Mercury Bay. We know about looking after our land, and I'm sure Sir Michael will be telling us about what he's been responsible for on Ahuahu. We know about how to get rid of the pests. We know about restoration planting. I've just planted about 400 trees with Mercury Bay area school students this last few days, and one of my counterparts is here. We know about replanting. We know about how to look after our land. But when it comes to our big blue black backyard, we just look at it and say, isn't it beautiful? And we have no concept of what's going on underneath there and the sheer devastation and destruction that is part and parcel of the practices that we have instituted. So what now? Sea change is actually not sitting on a dusty shelf, quite. I think it is gradually moving from dusty shelf to dusty shelf, right? No? Is. Hope so. But bureaucrats and bureaucracies move extremely slowly, and in the meantime, the degradation continues. In the 4 or 5 years since the sea change was delivered, little has happened except a lot of talking. And after the amount of knowledge, commitment, cooperation, and collaboration that created this report, I find this extremely disappointing. And I'm hoping that we will be hearing some news shortly about how sea change is actually going to be picked up and implemented little by little. Community interest and community action is essential for the protection of our Gulf. And Joe, we can only say thank you for the rahui on the scallop beds of this area. Indeed. On the way here today, somebody said to me, well, who's responsible for those scallop beds collapsing? And that's easy. It's every single one of us. We are all responsible in some way for not only the scallop beds, but other things that are going wrong. And it's in our hands to turn it around and make it better. However, always with community action, it is essential that that community action is well informed, with good information. And I'll just use one example as far as marine reserves are concerned, because that seems to be a catch cry that if we want to protect the Gulf, we have marine reserves. It's no use whatever putting a marine reserve just there because it's in my front door and it would be really nice to have a marine reserve there if there is actually no purpose to it. Whereas over here, there might be very real purpose with the habitat, the lava flows, and all the things that would make a functioning marine reserve productive for the rest of the Gulf. So community action is needed, community interest is essential, but it must be well informed and it must be well placed. In closing, I want to just give you a little task of something that I want you to think about. I just want you, as you go from here, to think about your memories of the Gulf when you were a kid. You know, when did you first come here and what were your memories? What shells did you find on the beach? What was happening in the rock pools? What what did you catch when you went fishing, and how many fish were you able to catch, and what were the different varieties of fish you caught? What was the bird life like? Then I want you to think what it's like right now. When you go out to the beach, what do you find? What's changed? And then, most importantly, and we look at those very fine children who introduced us here today. What do you want for them, for their children, and for their grandchildren? Do we want more of the same disappearance of all the things we love, or do we want it to be better than that? Bringing back the biodiversity and abundance of the Hauraki Gulf and Te Whanganui-a-Hei is what Sea Change was all about. So groups like what we have here today, you are a group of people who've turned up because you're interested. And it's in your hands then to become the kaitiaki of this beautiful place. And then we can all do even the smallest thing to help restore the abundance that we all believe we should have. Thank you all for coming. Kia ora tātou.
Thank you, Alison. Thank you very much, Kia ora. So now we have Dr. Tim Haggett speaking to us. Dr. Tim Haggett is from the Auckland University, and I think you are the leader of the Lee Marine Reserve Institute there. Is that right? Am I introducing correctly there, or is it not quite right?
No, not quite right.
Not quite right. He'll introduce himself better than I can. So thank you very much. Tim's data have been flowing into much of the reporting that is underlying the Hauraki Gulf Forum, I believe, and also Sea Change information. Thank you.
Thanks, Thomas. Kia ora koutou. Ko Tim Haggett aho. I'd like to firstly acknowledge Ngāti Hei as being kaitiaki of this area. And Joe, thanks for inviting me. I'd like to acknowledge everyone in the room and fellow panellists. I have the privilege of being able to go into marine reserves and outside marine reserves and survey what's on the seabed. Generally, it's sitting on the bottom for hours counting things. Whether it be sponges, seaweeds, kina, lobster, reef fish. We do it at Lee, Tawhanui and Hahei. And so what I'm going to do is just present some of the information that we've been finding. We've just finished the lobster surveys yesterday for Lee and Tawhanui, and we haven't done Hahei over the last couple of years, just due to COVID and various other reasons. There's the three marine reserves there, oddly shaped, and there's reasons around that. I'm sure if a lot of you in the room were to design a marine protected area, it might look different, might have simple boundaries. Point being, these are our three eminent ones in the Gulf. We have 6 in total. They only protect 0.3% of 1.2 million hectares of ocean. This map is probably a little bit hard to see. It's just the Te Whanganui-a-Hei Marine Reserve. We have 10 sites that we survey inside and 10 out for lobster and bent thick, which means things on the bottom. Okay. One of the key species we survey is the coulter, and I'm just going to present some information on that now. Back when we started the monitoring, it was in the early 90s, particularly around Lee and Tawhanui, and down here as well. Lee, it would take us probably about 2 weeks to survey the reserve. Now we've done it in 3 days, and it's not because we're getting any better at it. Let's go back. This is what I mean by surveying, is that we go to these sites, we run out 500 metre transect lines, and we go down the transect 5 metres either side, and we have to have torches to look into the dens, and we size the lobster, survey whether they're male or female, and work out how big their dens are, how many are in a den. And then we just write down onto our underwater paper with a pencil. I love it because it's low tech. The only technological problem is running out of batteries with your torch. Okay, but this is, I like to think of this as the people's data. It's fisheries independent data. It is funded by the Department of Conservation. This was yesterday in Lee Marine Reserve inside. Would you mind just, can you just click on that video, please? It should have been animated. Okay, that's fine. Basically, it's a den. There's about 30 lobster in there. Okay, that's what it used to be like outside the reserves. We only get these cohabitation, where you get males, females, and big nests together inside the marine reserves. Okay. What we noticed from the mid-90s is that our numbers in the reserves started to decline. Okay, the graph there is catch per unit effort within CRAE 2. Around the late 90s, early 2000s, catch per unit effort was really, really high. Okay. These graphs here, we have Lee, Tawhanui and Hahei at the bottom. Essentially what we're seeing is that the reserves were established here in the 70s. Okay, numbers slowly increased. Okay, we started around mid-90s. There's a difference in the colours. We started in the 90s to really start monitoring them under a framework that we worked together with the Department of Conservation. From around 1995 to 2000, there was a massive decline in the reserve. Okay, there's a slight increase around about 2006, but it just hasn't never recovered to those levels in the 90s. Okay, there's been probably about an 80% decline in the reserve population. Outside the reserve, we had a big decline since the 90s as well, and it hasn't recovered at all. Okay, the levels that we have in the reserves at Lee at the moment are equivalent to what used to be outside the reserves back in the 90s. Okay, and it's the same story for Tawhanui and Hahei. Okay. And that's consistent with catch per unit effort going down as well, okay, in the fishery, in the wider fishery. All right. So what we've been doing recently is actually tagging the lobsters, okay, to see where they go. We've had funding from overseas up to the tune of 3 million to do research. And so basically we put tags onto the back of the lobsters. We're using males at the moment. We have hydrophones under the water, and they will record a ping. As the animal moves past the hydrophones, it records a ping, and we can triangulate where they go. And this data is actually being processed at the moment. The map on the right there is basically some old work from Shane Kelly, and you can see the reserve boundary. Yeah, those black vectors are basically movement patterns from tags. Okay, so we can see that at certain times the lobsters are protected within the reserves, but when they move out beyond the boundary, okay, they're open to getting caught. All right. Back in the 90s, early 2000s, you could tell the boundaries of a lot of these marine reserves because there was just cray pots around them. Okay, and that's how they were defined. I'm just going to show you, this is Ashley Flood. She's one of my students. She's just finished looking at what the lobsters feed on when they move beyond the boundaries, okay? And so we know that they come in around this time to mate, then they move offshore, feeding on things in the sand, bivalves and things like that. This is Ben Hans. He's actually been working with commercial fishers up at Lee, again to look at how far the lobsters move. We have some indication that they're not moving so far now as they used to back in the 90s. The population structures have changed so much. Okay, these graphs here, and this is really what I want to press to everyone tonight, is that the grey, along the bottom we have size. Okay, I'm not sure if it's probably a bit hard to see, but then we have a vertical line here going up that is division between legal and sub-legal. Can everyone see that? I can provide these to everyone in a bit more clarity. So we have Li, Tawhanui, Hahei. Okay, so the grey is the protected. So inside the reserves, even though the numbers have declined, we do have big ones. Okay. When we go outside the reserves, we do still get a few legals, but it's very, very low, and particularly relative to what it used to be back in the 90s. Okay, so what does all this mean? Well, we've worked out that the larval production, the egg production from the females is probably about 23 times higher in the reserve, okay, because we still do have these big animals. But outside the reserves, we're not getting the big ones, and that has real consequences for the mating. Okay, so in the reserves, we often see the males challenging each other. All right, the female will choose which male she wants to mate with. Okay, you get this big social structure in the dens. Outside, you don't get that. Okay, and so it's a scramble competition to find a mate. They're generally immature. They may have only mated once or twice before being caught. Okay, so that's sort of like what the current status is in the Gulf. This is a video I took yesterday along one of the transact lines. This is a big male lobster just out in the open. And in this crack here, there's a female that he's courting with. Okay, and you see this behaviour in the marine reserves because we've got the big animals in there, and you get that selection going. It's quite interesting that two other panellists have mentioned urchin barons. If we went back 5 years ago, most people would look at you as though you're crazy talking about things like this, so it's really good that it's been brought to light. This is in the Hahei Marine Reserve 2 years ago. A male lobster with a kinner. This is early in the morning. We often find when we do the surveys there's fresh eaten kinner in the dens. Okay, and that's a male lobster and just outside his den. And this is a barren, urchin barren in the process of being formed. And this is just outside of Maharangi Island, outside the reserve. Okay, what we find is the urchins will form grazing fronts, and they'll essentially move down the reef and graze through the kelp. Okay, you can see there's a bite mark out of the stipe there of the kelp. And I'm sure a few of you would have seen this, that those that dive and snorkel, particularly south of the reserve. Okay, and that's just because the big predators aren't there, as we've already discussed. I just want to briefly mention the other part of the thing is that we look at fish. So the Department of Conservation, James Blackmore and his team will do baited underwater video surveys. That's where we put down videos and we attract the fish into the field of view, and then we can count them. The same really situation with snapper inside and outside the reserves. Again, we have Li, Tawhanui and Hahei. The big difference is when in the reserve we get the big animals, okay? Outside, not so much, okay? There are different movement patterns inside reserves and outside and things like that, but it's we use a lot of techniques to reduce biases when we count them. And I just want to end on this. Again, the importance of having big animals in the system, okay? So a big snapper, or what I call a big snapper, anywhere between 60, 70 centimetres, the amount of reproductive, or the amount of eggs or larvae that will be able to produce, you need the equivalent of 30 centimetre snappers to have that same reproductive output. Okay, that's why we need to protect the big animals. Okay, again, snapper reproduction, and based on work at Lee, has suggested there's about 20% higher reproductive output from the reserves. Okay, I just want to end on this last bit here is because there's a lot of talk around, well, if you're going to put a marine reserve in, you're going to lock up areas where we want to go fishing, and that fishing pressure will be more intense elsewhere where there aren't reserves, and I get that. But what we're seeing here on the left is a model, what we can do. It's called a biophysical model, so we know how big snapper are inside the reserves. We can then model larval output. Okay, so this is the Lee coastline. I'm sorry I don't have one for Hahe. There's a lot of work that goes into these. And we can see that the larvae from the reserve is actually tracking 40 kilometres south and a little bit to the north. Okay. Now it's a mathematical model, biophysical model, so the oscillations is the tides, okay, and currents. It's over a month. Now the first rule with models is we don't believe them, okay, so we have to back that up with science. So for those fisher people in the audience, some lucky people got to go fishing in the reserve and caught 1,000 fish, and from there took fin clips and genetic markers. And then fish obviously went back, and then the team went and got sampled juvenile snapper in a 400 kilometre area south of the reserve. Okay, little juveniles there, so the larvae will drift in the water column for a month, then they'll settle into shallow areas. And then those juveniles, they took a fin clip, and then from that result, it worked out that 10.6% of that sample size had come back from the reserve. Okay, so it's not really essentially, and this is the point I want to make, about locking up areas. It's about ensuring that you've got a bank for future fisheries. Okay, so imagine if we had a network of reserves placed properly, you'd argue that you have better protection and you'd have better fishing. Okay, so I'll just end on that note. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tim. That's amazing data, and it reminds us that it's often the tipping points that are so important. You know, you fish a bit more, and suddenly you fish too much, and things collapse under you. So it's those tipping points that we need to be aware of that are in our environment, and there are many of them. And the pressures on our environment are multitude. It's our fishing, it's also climate change, the ocean chemistry is changing, the plastic, and all those pressures add up, and suddenly you have a tipping point and you lose ability to reproduce, and it's dreadful. Thank you very much. Now we have Daryl Sykes from the New Zealand Rock Lobster Council, is that correct? Yeah. To present us data on the rock lobster fisheries in the CR2 area, I would think. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Kia ora tātou, everyone. Thank you for the invitation today. I'm going to pick up on the theme that we started with: rights, obligations and responsibilities. I've been a commercial fisherman, professional fisherman for 49 years, most of that time in the rock lobster industry. I was a fisherman for 20 of those years. I've been a fisheries researcher, a fisheries manager since then. I work for the fishing industry. I manage a research contract, and my client is the Ministry for Fisheries, or Fisheries New Zealand as they call themselves now. I just want to take you through a brief slideshow, give you a slightly different perspective. Can somebody tell me? Okay, thank you. Yeah, it's not a happening thing. Okay, so some guiding principles to work with when you're dealing with fisheries. From abundance all benefits flow, and you cannot manage what you do not know. Right, so very quickly, this is what's known as the Cray 2 Fisheries Management Area, and you can see it's a large area. It extends from TRI, south of Whangarei, all the way down to East Cape. On the right-hand side of the screen, you have what is known as Statistical Area 906. It's one of several statistical areas that make up the Cray-2 fishery, and it's the one most immediately relevant to Whitianga. Slide again, please. The Cray-2 fishery is not a big fishery, and it never has been. That's the commercial catch from 1945 to 1991. It peaked back in the 1980s at around 450 tonnes. Back in the days where there were no limits on what could be taken, there were no limits on the number of vessels that could operate, there were no limits on the number of pots or traps they could use, or on any method that they could use to catch. So people were catching with set nets and free scuba diving as well. It was legal in the day. It wasn't until 1990 that rock lobster fisheries came into the quota management system, and when they did, a total allowable commercial catch was initially set for them. It did not become a total allowable commercial catch, a total allowable catch until some years later. So initially it was only the commercial catch limit that was imposed. From an industry point of view, the issue around the obligations and the responsibilities is manifested in what we would call the stewardship that commercial rights holders show in favour of the fisheries in which they have an interest. And like me with a long-term interest, so too does the Cray-2 rock lobster industry. Industry-funded supervised vessel logbook programs. I'll talk about these in some more detail. Observer catch sampling. Effort spreading initiatives. This was particularly the case across the Coromandel coast several years ago in that 906 statistical area I just showed you. Industry-funded tag and release programs. Industry-funded perilous settlement programs. Perilous are the final stage of juvenile rock lobsters when they come ashore to settle and grow and become the catches that you look for later on. The adoption of management procedures in setting TACs, choosing conservative TAC options, retiring commercial catching rights, biotoxin management responses, and an initiative called Whale Safe. There are risk interactions between rock lobster pots and whales, and you would be aware that there have been one or two incidents on the Whitianga coastline in the last 5 years. So you cannot manage what you do not measure. So currently the industry is in the 12th season of collecting fine-scale catch and effort data, catching information about the size, the sex mix, males and females, fecundity, abundance and the condition of the lobster. We have 14 vessels collecting fine-scale spatial information as well as the catch composition, and they're doing that from most of the trap lifts or the pot lifts on each trip that they go to sea. And to date we've got about 1.7 million pieces of data relating to commercial catches of rock lobsters. And we have a supplementary observer catch sampling data because there are people who don't believe that industry generated data has any credibility. We also have independent observers working on board commercial vessels doing catch sampling work to the Ministry of Fisheries specification. I should have mentioned that all of this data collected in the vessel logbook program is also done to the Ministry of Fisheries specification. Next slide, please. We use electronic logbooks. This is an initiative that was driven by the Cray-2 rock lobster industry. They built the system. On the left is a data logger. On the right, GPS. This is a system we use for fieldwork data collection, but the unit on the left is one that's used by the majority of the Cray-2 fleet to record catch and effort data during the day. Next slide, please. This is where we fish. I don't know whether you've ever thought about rock lobsters and where they live, but I can assure you that rock lobsters don't live in uniformly thick assemblages across every square metre of the seabed within the boundary of the Cray-2 fishery or even within the boundary of Statistical Area 906. There is rock lobster habitat of varying productivity and there is no rock lobster habitat. So the yellow lines are roughly where the commercial fishing effort directed at rock lobsters occurs within the Cray-2 fishery. Slide, please. This is just a snapshot inside the Gulf. This is where we fish inside the Gulf. Next slide, please. This is a record of pot lifts at locations that we fish. That is the scale at which we collect data. Next slide, please. A summary of data going to be hard for you to read, but out of 120,000 lobsters measured between 2005 and 2019, and the 1920 fishing year is the last year for which I have a complete set of data. So we've measured in the last fishing year 4,277 lobsters, but over the years we've measured different numbers. The minimum legal size, as the previous speaker pointed out, is 54 millimetres for males and 60 for females. We are measuring the mean size at 58 and 62 respectively out of 120,000 lobsters. Next slide, please. Oh, maybe I've got to do it. No, it's not working for me, I'm sorry. Observer catch sampling. This is the technician contracted to do this work. Again, as I mentioned, to ministry specification. In the 2021 fishing year, ended on the 31st of March this year, technician measured and recorded 9,525 lobsters for size, sex, length, frequency, condition and fecundity. Different result to what the previous speaker said. I strongly dispute the assertion that there are no big fish in the fishery. Males on the left, females on the right. Size distribution of lobsters observed in commercial pots. Minimum legal size there and there. 54, 60. There are more than reasonable numbers of larger rock lobsters across the Cray-2 fishery. There's an example of what the commercial pots are seeing. Next slide. There's an example of what recreational divers are seeing. This is stuff that's freely available if you want to scan around Facebook posts on a regular basis. There are lobsters out there. Tag and release. We're tagging for both growth and for movement. We've tagged 25,000 lobsters since 1990. We've got 4,783 tag recapture reports. That's the technician doing the tagging. The tags in the back of the lobster there, pretty hard to see, unfortunately. This is information, this is growth information and movement information. You won't read these, but to show you Red Mercury, Fletcher's Bay were familiar to you. Lobsters that have been released and been recaptured and re-released up to 6 times. I think my top lobster so far is off Red Mercury is 11 captures and recaptures. And for each capture and recapture, a growth increment is recorded, and that growth increment is placed into the stock assessment models. Purulus monitoring, juvenile rock lobsters. Most of the purulus monitoring elsewhere around New Zealand occurs in very shallow inshore waters. We couldn't get permission to put the collectors in shallow inshore waters in Tauranga, so we adapted a Tasmanian deep water trap for juvenile rock lobsters, placed these out along the coast between Tairua and Whitianga, and within a season had them cut off, vandalised and smashed. So that's a project that's currently in abeyance until we decide whether we're going to continue to invest more money in the risk of having it wrecked. The rock lobster industry, the Cray-2 industry here, has been part of creating the first DNA profile of a species, a marine species in New Zealand. Work that we did in a collaboration with Victoria University Wellington and an organisation called the Seafood Innovations Limited. This is published work. This is work that says a lot about the issue of egg production and subsequent settlement and recruitment to the fishery. And we might talk some more about that in the Q&A. Next slide, please. Biotoxin response plan. We've had to close the commercial fishery in the Bay of Plenty twice since 2011. because of toxic algal blooms. It is very unlikely, in my view, that toxic algal blooms only impact on rock lobsters in terms of changing their behaviour. We know that they're toxic and we know they're a food safety risk, but there's other effects on lobster populations as there are on shellfish populations. Toxic algal blooms are becoming more frequent and more virulent. Next slide, please. Whale Safe, 2 projects that the industry has developed, funded themselves. Whale Safe is a manual that's available to all commercial rock lobster fishermen or anybody else for that matter who's interested. Ocean Snap is a smartphone app which enables at-sea observations of marine mammals, seabirds, whatever. But there's a really simple interface. Take a photo, load it when you get within Wi-Fi or cell phone range, and it goes to a database to which you have access. That's not something that's limited to commercial users only. Next slide, please. That's an example of orca on the beach where I live. I live at Nawi at Cape Palliser in the South Wairarapa. Woke up one morning and saw the orca in the bay. Later in the morning, they came in very, very close. So that's an ocean snap. Take the photo. Here's the information about latitude, longitude, a time, and a map reference. And we are building up a map of observations around the country. Slide, please. So from the industry point of view, our vision for the medium and long-term future of the fishery is that all extractive users demonstrate the level of stewardship and constraint that our industry has applied to managing our fishery for over 3 decades. We don't anticipate ever seeing the Cray-2 as a super abundant fishery, capable of sustaining very high seasonal catches. However, at current levels of catch and with nature taking its course in terms of strength of larval settlement, we anticipate an improvement within a few seasons. And I have something to read, but I can't see it with the lights off. I'll leave it to the Q&A. Next slide, please. Ka whakapai te kai o te moana. The literal translation is growing seafood, but the inference here is the industry as gardeners of the food of the ocean, tending to, nurturing, not just taking. And that is the principle that underpins the way that the Cray-2 rock lobster industry and the rock lobster industry around the country looks at our interaction with the fisheries, with the stock itself, and reflects our aspirations in how we manage those fisheries. So thank you.
Daryl? Thank you very much, Daryl, for this contribution. I'm sure there will be questions in the Q&A to compare data and perspectives. And next up is Sue Norrer from the Noises Trust and a local to Whitianga. Thank you.
Tēnā koutou katoa ko Sue Norrer te tōku ingoa. I'd like to acknowledge Ngāti Hay and Joe and everyone here today. Thank you very much for coming out to listen. I'd like to say a few words about the Noises Trust. And it was formed to establish, it was formed by our family to ensure the ongoing protection enhancement of the islands. And we hope in the future to include some parts of the marine environment so that in our future we're able to use this special place for education, to offer as educational opportunities, research opportunities, so that it better guides us in goals for holistic protection of land and sea. So the Noises are located on the outer bounds of the inner Gulf, and they're about 24 kilometres from Auckland. They enjoy a mixture of the turbid inner Gulf waters and the much clearer outer Gulf waters. And they're about 2.5 kilometres from Rakino. To our family, they're much more than just a place to go fishing, but it's their reputation as a wonderful fishery which has largely contributed to the depleted state of the marine environment which we see there today. Those of us who've spent time on the Hauraki Gulf over a lot of years we may have seen the changes. And my memories go back to the early 70s and the gradual ebbing away of the life. There was once so much life, you know, with the huge workups, and everything's been reduced to an often really silent world. And that's just what you can see sitting on the surface from a boat. But for those of us who've fished around the noises nowadays, the fishing doesn't live up to its reputation. And I wonder how many fishers have ever considered why the fishing was once legendary there. And if they knew what was underneath them, then perhaps they'd understand. And the reefs on which so many have fished, including our family, were once covered in an amazing variety of seaweeds and colourful sponges and extensive mussel reefs. Crabs, crayfish, octopus, reef fish. They provided protection, food and habitat for a huge array of fish, not just the reef fish, which are totally reliant on the health of the reefs for their survival, but the schooling fish, like the mackerel and the piper and the sprats. And they in turn brought in the kingfish and the kahawai, while the mussel beds, well, they attracted the snapper. This area was the underwater equivalent, I feel, of a rainforest. It was so rich in biodiversity, but it was out of sight, and it is largely out of sight. And that's why it's been severely compromised. So for many of us who've put their heads under the water, they may not have noticed the life or the changes in abundance, because often our motivation to dive has been for the purpose of taking something. And be that crayfish, spearfishing, reef fish, snapper, kingfish, or collecting scallops and mussels. So nowadays, I'm interested to hear what Daryl had to say, because our observations are that the crayfish have gone. I'm interested to see Daryl's data, because if in fact the data varies so much from the survey work we've had done and our own observations, perhaps we could share some of that commercial data so that we can better plan how we manage that fishery. Certainly the hāpoko are gone, and they were memories from my dad's day, and you'd be hard pushed to spear a butterfish now. So then people move on to other things. The scallops bed's been hammered for years, really, by recreational dredging and just the sheer numbers of boats which anchor with their chains being dragging across the seafloor. The pressure over a day, which might be perhaps 100 divers or more, and they're removing scallops each time the weather is reasonable. Over many years, it's finally taken its toll, and that bed has completely collapsed. It's a pretty terrible thing, because up to 15 years ago, you could snorkel on that bed and the scallops would be dense like that, and there'd be horse mussels standing up like sentinels, and they're just so fantastic at filtering sedimented water. And there were sponges and rhodoliths, which are these beautiful, intricate things that look like corals. There was so much life down there. And when I snorkel on there now, it makes me really sad. But the thing that encourages me is that you still see there's structure there. If we just left it alone, it would recover. And that's, I guess, the key thing now. In the present situation, where the marine environment around the noises isn't protected, all we see are steady declines and loss of species, many of which result from the kinnibarrens, which have been talked about, and they dominate so many of the rocky reefs around the noises. So other species have gone because of the kinnibarrens, which have destroyed the habitat they need to survive. And I'm not even talking about the myriads of creatures down there that we don't eat and we don't value in any way, therefore they're not known, and that nobody cares. But we don't even know what they do for ecosystems, and we don't even know what impact it's having, them disappearing, in part because of these kinnibarrens. Now what's happening is it's the extensive mussel beds, the deeper water mussel beds, and especially the shallower saltwater mussel beds around the noises, which are being targeted because so many of the other things have already been taken. If we let that happen and if we lose those, they're the endemic stock in the Hauraki Gulf. So it means that we also lose the ability to study that stock, which is endemic. And we lose our ability to use them to guide us for our shellfish restoration. And maybe even the ability to guide the aquaculture industry with that endemic stock. We lose the ability to filter, which is so critical. And we lose that enormous range of life that was once within those mussel beds, that habitat for the juvenile fish. So it makes no sense to continue to hammer them. The noises have been in my family since 1933, and Dad passed his knowledge and love of the islands and the underwater world to my brother, sister and me, and we passed that on to the next generation. And we understood very clearly from an early age that the privilege of being able to enjoy something so special comes with a strong sense of responsibility to look after it. Having been predator-free since 2002, the terrestrial environment's thriving, but that makes the contrast between the land and the sea all the more stark. And while we can look at the islands themselves and see they're thriving, we need to look after the waters that surround them. So today I'll focus on the marine environment and what we're trying to do about it. In 2013, we had a chance to voice our concerns about what we were seeing in the marine environment through the sea change process that Alison talked about. And for our part, we've been sharing our marine knowledge of change, and we're fortunate to receive help from Foundation North to have extensive marine surveys carried out around the noises. And the findings of these supported our observations of decline, and we started inviting people to come out to the islands so they could have a first-hand experience of what we were saying. This approach has been an excellent way of cementing some of the issues which the Gulf faces by providing a classroom and a meeting place in an environment rather than around a table. And over the past 5 or 6 years, we've hosted many trips with stakeholders. That's from fishermen and divers right through to politicians. We're really fortunate to have wonderful support from Auckland Museum, Tamaki Paingahira, and the University of Auckland. And visits always include specialists with knowledge on seabirds, archaeological events, and the marine world. It's quite hard to see here. Thank you very much. So all our lives, we have realised the connection that Māori have had with the motu. And to work with iwi and mana whenua to find solution has been a priority for us and is a priority for us. There's a significant midden located on Otata, and recent excavations carried out with the Auckland Museum and mana whenua confirm the islands were visited and used since before the Rangitoto eruption. The middens themselves, they're a library which can be dated, which tell us of the fish species, shellfish, abundance, size, birds and vegetation, and how it's all changed over the past 700 years or more. It tells the story of the people who came long before us. And we can use this information to know what to aspire to when we try to restore some of what's been lost. Information the middens shows us in the Hauraki Gulf, information in the middens, it shows us that the Hauraki Gulf is in a crisis when all we aspire to is being able to catch snapper, kahawai, kingfish, and maybe talk about the odd crayfish that we might have found. For the past few years, we've been developing relationships with iwi and mana whenua representatives, and we're keeping the door open to try and ensure all of those who feel they have a connection to the motu are included. This continues to be a hugely privileged part of our journey. To be able to learn from one another and to be able to share our knowledge is enriching and really rewarding. And we're exploring the common ground, the knowledge long held by iwi that we must protect whole ecosystems. Land and sea aren't separate, but they've been treated that way. And by listening and respecting one another's knowledge, and by combining all of our knowledge sets and remaining inclusive and transparent, we're doing all we can to find the best ways for restoring the Māori to the Hauraki Gulf. We need urgent action to stop the degradation that we're seeing and start a process of regeneration while we work together toward more appropriate solutions for the future of not only the noises but the Hauraki Gulf. We can't consider using something sustainably until we even understand what that means. Our kids and future generations should have the same or better opportunities to see what we did as children. And in the future, we'd love to continue to use these waters for marine education and marine research, perhaps trial some forms of active regeneration so to kickstart ecosystems again and find out how would that benefit the rest of the Hauraki Gulf. We're interested in finding solutions, and when we speak of the future, we strongly believe we must be able to offer these opportunities in an atmosphere of regeneration, not continuing decline. And I don't think we can really imagine what we would see if we protected a network of areas of high biodiversity in the Hauraki Gulf, because none of us have ever seen what that could look like. And for me, that's just it's such an exciting prospect to think that there's this possibility to see so much more. Later this year, Auckland Museum, with input from the University of Auckland, they're going to be starting ecological surveys which will monitor change over the next 50 years, both on the land and in the sea. And this is really exciting as it fits in with our goals for holistic protection, and it'll provide a unique opportunity to study the connections between the two, the seabirds being one of those main links that Joe was talking about, and using science, Matauranga Māori, and our own knowledge. How good would it feel to be part of something recovering and regenerating? That's a rare thing in today's world of uncertainty. And that's so important to our family because all of our lives we've just seen decline. And every time we host people on the islands or bring visitors there, all we talk about is what used to be and what we've lost. We have an opportunity now to understand that we're not separate from the environment, but part of it. And we can be better kaitiaki and determine a better future for our marine environments, which will mean a better future for ourselves and the generations to come. Thank you very much.
Kia ora, Sue. Thank you. Thank you very much. We have two brief contributions still, one from Dennis Teague to talk to us about what the council perspective is, I think, and also there's a submission period, I think, was kind of important. You might want to talk about, I think. Yeah. Cool, thank you.
Kia ora, it's great to be here, and it's great to see so many people here. I've been to 2 or 3 meetings in Whiringa on public transport and tsunamis and now this, and it's really just a privilege to see how much you care for your community and your environment. So thank you very much for coming. I'd like to echo Alison's comments about the contribution that Joe Davis has made and his leadership. And I just ponder, if it hadn't been for that leadership, I wonder whether this meeting would have actually occurred at all. So thanks very much, Joe. I want to talk a wee bit about what part the regional council plays in all this. So just to give you an idea of the jurisdiction. So if you just think of the wet area from the high mean spring mark out to the 12-mile limit, that's basically where the regional council has jurisdiction. We have 6 strategic goals, and one of them is the marine environment. But unfortunately, marine issues are spread across a whole variety of committees. So if you have 13 members, as we do, we only have 3 general electorates which have a coast, and this one being one of them. And then we have 2 Māori iwi electorates which cover the whole region, so they are very supportive in terms of marine issues. But you can see from that it can be quite difficult to get marine issues at the sort of front and centre of what the council does. And I think that's because the regional council has traditionally been involved more in land issues, flood protection and that sort of thing. And I think that's perhaps reflected in what I'm about to talk about next. So you may be aware that there was a case relating to Motiti Island, and that sent shockwaves through the regional council sector, because the Court of Appeal held that a regional council may now impose controls over fisheries resources under the RMA, such as the protection of indigenous biodiversity, so long as it doesn't impact the Fisheries Act side of things. So that was a huge change, and I think it's been a real wake-up call for regional councils that they now have that responsibility. And so what has been the regional council's response to that? Well, it's first of all said it will do what they call marine spatial plans and use mapping tools and rules to prohibit or set out the framework for fishing in a given area. Now, this is very challenging because whatever the regional council comes up with, it's going to have to stand the scrutiny of an appeal to the Environment Court. So, very solid evidence indeed is going to be needed. And the Motiti Island had the benefit of the RENA issue, and of course there was a huge amount of research that went into that. But in the Waikato region, that's really missing. So apart from the Hahei Reserve, there is still quite a lack of data around these topics. And because they haven't been dealing with this issue before, there's also a lack of resources and staff. So personally, I've found the response from the council a bit underwhelming, and I want to talk to you at the end of my comments about how you can correct that. There is some good news. The Regional Council does plan to map subtidal habitats around the Mercury Islands out to 20 metres, and it will carry out aerial photography studies and other assessments of selected sites. So that's a good start, but it's, there's a long way to go on this, and I think we're only just starting down that journey. I think there's another issue which is relevant to this, and that's climate change. We've got coastal hazards, ocean warming, acidification, and new diseases which may come to the fore with climate change. So climate change, we'll often think of it's just about land stuff and floods and droughts, but there are significant impacts on the marine environment. And to give you one example, a recent study has found that bottom trawling releases as much carbon into the atmosphere as all international air travel. So, that's quite a sobering thought, isn't it? So I think that's why we all need, if we think about why we come to a meeting like this, what can we do? Well, one thing we can do is put pressure on central and local government to be really strong on climate change, because that will affect the oceans. And just to give you another little snapshot of that on what's called blue carbon, there's been a study done on the Tairua Harbour by the Regional Council, and they measured organic carbon in salt marsh and mangroves and in sediment. And the carbon stocks in cropland and grassland on land are about 3 to 19 tonnes per hectare, but coastal vegetated habitats are between 27 and 90 tonnes. So there's, again, huge amounts of carbon stored in our harbours and estuaries. So I think the contribution of blue carbon has been grossly underestimated. And if you think about how our harbours are choked with sediment, that can cover over these grasses, and then we lose that benefit. So that's why another thing you could do is to consider joining a harbour care group, because if we can protect the catchment of those harbours, then we prevent the sediment running into them. And Dean Allen is here. If you mind standing up, Dean, thanks. Dean's the manager in Whitianga, so there's regional council funding for this purpose, and Dean and his team have got a lot of expertise in this area, so if you're not already a member of a group, I'd encourage you to do so. So what else can we do? Well, I think if we want marine protection, we actually have to demand it. And I think people power and so on is a really powerful force. And what's good is that you have actually a once-in-a-generation opportunity to influence the Waikato Regional Coastal Plan. It hasn't been reviewed for 20 years, and it's now up for grabs. So that consultation will go through the rest of this year, but there is an interim period where you can sort of comment on the direction of that plan by the 18th of June. And again, Dean has some material. Have a chat to him afterwards. You can see how you can make a submission. And of course, we've got Scott here. Another thing you can do is lobby the politicians and central government and the ministers and see if we can get real change at that level. So in terms of a submission, there's a lot of things you could say, but here's a bit of a wish list that I personally would like to see in that plan. That we immediately start creating marine protection areas with a target of 30% protection. That we immediately limit bottom impact fishing. So we put the costs on the fishers for that. So rather than the ratepayer having to pay that cost, you'd have to apply for a resource consent. You'd have to do an environmental impact report to go with that. So we don't wait for the maps, we don't wait for Joe to do his thing. We actually get stuck in and do that now. That we encourage the restoration of shellfish beds, and that we prohibit dumping and mining in our marine environment. So I'm sure you've got lots of other things you'd like to see happen, but there's a bit of a wish list. As I said, Dean's got some printed material. Have a chat to him afterwards. Thanks very much.
Dennis. And now we have a word by Michael Fay from Ahu Ahu to tell us his perspective.
You forgot, Thomas, that I said I was coming to listen.
Okay, Michael came to listen. That is fantastic, but nevertheless.
Congratulate you. No, I don't need that. Thank you very much. I would congratulate Joe, who I've worked with a lot over the last decades, doing on Ahu Ahu. And Thomas for bringing us all together, and all of us coming today. We've got to be careful in something like this. I've been in and out of this sort of space on Ahu Ahu for nearly 50 years now. You can get quite confused on all the information.
Sorry, a lot of people came to hear you, and
So I'm standing up and my bum's not so quiet. Anybody else like to stand up? It's been a long time. Can you hear me now? I beg your pardon. I thought I could get to the back of the room, but no longer. I just congratulated Joe for the Rahui. He and I have worked together for quite a few decades now, and his family had also worked with Pat Mizzen on Mercury Island over altogether now 100 years. That's quite a while. The information's been collected out there by Mizzen and then more recently by myself. So I think what the problem is that we get very confused in some of these issues. There's a lot of different views and different interest groups. I think we've just got to get always to the bottom line. Things have changed. They've changed dramatically. We have to do something about it. We can't sit on our backsides and think that things will stay the same. They won't, and they haven't. I can be encouraging, though, because what I've seen firsthand being involved on Mercury Island is quite staggering of what happens if you get out of the way, you stop certain activities, you create certain things, you start certain things, you take pests off the places we have on the island now about 7 or 8 years ago. And what you see is quite amazing. And I'm a huge believer that the land does it. You just have to get out of the way. I'm also a believer in simple terms that the sea will do it also. But with respect to some of the different views and things, I think the big answer is we just have to get out of the way. We have to put our interests aside. There's too much self-interest in many of these discussions. We actually have to have quite a lot of force from the community group, and Dennis was right, I agree with him. We don't want to sit back and think we can't say what we want to see. We want to see change, we want to see protection, we want to see things improving. And my own observation is if we move and move aggressively, it changes quickly. Mercury Island has changed dramatically We worked there for 40 odd years. This is almost too much talking for me now. We're supposed to have questions and answers, and it finishes in 5 minutes, you told me, Thomas. But this is a positive message in the middle of all of this from me, from what I've seen and quite frankly, what I've been involved with. When we had all of the work we did out there, and we planted a lot. I think we planted 700 or 800,000 native trees out there. We created the forest in the back country, which was pretty much wasteland, and we've seen the change in amongst that. So that's over 45 years. And it went very, very well. But the big change was dramatic when we took the pests off Mercury Island. You know, you just couldn't miss what happened at every level. Not just birds, but bumblebees. We never used to see bumblebees on Mercury Island because the rats eat the bumblebee nests. We now see lots of bumblebees. This is not literally rocket science. We had a bit of rocket science out there in the early days of Rocket Lab launching rockets. This is not rocket science at all. This is just actually being outcome focused and actually collecting information. It has to be science. It can't be a guessing game, but it has to be outcome focused. Too much talking and not enough do. And I think that's what I feel frustrated about when I see things like the sea around Mercury Island. I did 2 things the other day. I walked up and down the beach, Long Beach, which you will know is the big beach between the 2 larger land masses, and I was quite heartened. I only picked up about 2 handfuls of rubbish in a kilometre of beach, which means the people who visit us, the public who get there, are doing a great job. The best thing that's ever happened to us out there, that the public have got involved, and they share the responsibility. It's a job we can't do without the public involvement. Then it was disappointing. The other day I went along the same beach after the big storms and all the kinner had come ashore. And I went the same kilometre. There was not one piece of kinner that didn't have plastic involved with it. And most of it you could never get rid of it. If you dived down for a day you wouldn't get rid of it. Fish nest netting tangled in with it. That is actually happening and you can't stop it. And it's all plastic. You might, I suppose we're a moment of humour at the end of this, are we? You might remember the movie, what was it, The Graduate? Most of us are old enough to remember The Graduate. Mrs. Robinson and Mrs. Robinson's boyfriend, Dustin Hoffman, The Graduate. And I don't think the husband knew what was going on between Mrs. Robinson and The Graduate, but he was very keen to tell Dustin Hoffman what the jobs of the future were all about. He said, boy, the future is in plastic. Well, unfortunately, he's proved out to be very right. The future, unfortunately, has been a large part of plastic. Those sorts of things have to change. And the only way they change is if we, at the bottom of the heap, start pushing and saying we don't want stuff packaged like that. We won't buy it. The thing that hurts me the most, and if I was a young activist, what I would do would be really, really simple. I'd like to see those sharks not getting killed through the world, just to create shark's fin soup for the Japanese. I'd say the Japanese, you don't get shark's fin soup. Then they'd say, well, we want it. So fine, if you don't stop it, we won't buy Japanese products anywhere in the world. Then you might get some, now, I don't know who's going to do it, I'm not going to do it, I'm too past my use-by date. But somebody else could actually start those sorts of initiatives, and these days I think that everybody would be behind it. There's nothing wrong with being an old activist. I'm only talking about me, darling, not you. Older, how's that? So I think at the end of the day, you go away from here with enthusiasm that we're all in this together. We've come together to talk about it, to listen, to collect information, but we have to be outcome focused. We have to start doing things. We had an event on Mercury Island the other day, which was quite special for me because the pests have all gone. It's a story that goes back to 3 individuals in the 70s who were out there on one of the Mercuries, David Towns, Ian Stringer, I think, Rob Chappell, and they found 3 only Mercury Island Tusqueta in existence. They were the only 3 in the whole world. They set to it themselves to actually rescue that population. There's now, on the Red Mercury the other day, I was told the count is about 50 to 100,000 Mercury Island Tusqueta. Now, I'm not going to blame your lot, Joe, when they got there, but I think arrival, as you and I have talked about, arrival on Mercury Island of mammals, bringing other mammals, like rats and dogs, was catastrophic for the tusk weta on the island. They would have been gone. People tell me who know about these things, they would probably only lasted 100 years. So the other day when we brought them back, and Joe did a karakia out there, and it was very emotional for all of us, 700 years later, we put those back onto Mercury Island. After 700 years, we were able to get those species back and flourishing. So, well, not me. I was told I'm not allowed to get anywhere near it because someone thought I wanted to keep a pet weta. I don't want a pet weta. Thank you very much. So I encourage you to come to these discussions. I came for this to listen and to meet everybody else here because I live now. I've been the last 10 years living on Mercury Island. I live in the district. I'm local. And I share the same concerns of all of us. But I think we've got to be much more active. We have to be much more demanding. We have to say that some things are not acceptable. We have to push for things like the sea change plan to happen. We have to push hard. And at the end of the day, we can change things. And I'm astonished from my own time out there, nearly 50 years now, how quickly things change. We don't have to give up. We won't give up. And we'll see very quickly something for our collective action. So thank you for coming along. I've thoroughly enjoyed learning and listening. My bum feels much better now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you very much. So we love you all to be here, and we're going to extend it a bit longer, I think, because we haven't got the panel discussion yet, and you haven't got your break. And there's some food, some kind, some drinks to have. So I think if you want to hang out, it would be lovely. If you would hang out, it would be fantastic. We have a 10-minute break. And don't forget to put your questions through to the audience, to the panel, with the meet.ps/ocean, which you can reach on your phone. Or you can walk to the desk and write a question down, which will be fed to the panel. So if you want to hang out, that would be fantastic. We'd love you to be here. And so enjoy some leg stretching that you definitely deserved. Thank you. Than we thought. But
I told you.
You can, yeah.
Just while they're here. Hello. Good evening, everyone. My name is Noel Hewlett, and I've been here lived in this area for 40 years. And I've been on council for 15 years of that. And I think the discussion today is fantastic, but there's one thing that I think has to be mentioned. There's got to be a corollary with the sea and the land. And I believe that a lot of the problems that we're having is caused by sewage outlets, by stormwater outlets, contaminated. And this must be said so that there's the two factors. Sea change is one thing, but the corollary with the land and the effects of growth and this sort of thing must be a major part to be mentioned. So I thought I'd just bring that forward because we need each other, but we need to be working with the land and the sea to come to the outcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Right, I think our intermission time is probably coming to an end soon, so we have a bit of a time for our panel to reconvene for our question panel time. So if you could go back slowly to your wonderful seats, and then we'll join for our panel discussion in a few minutes. Thank you. And don't forget to put your questions through. We will not be able to get to many questions this afternoon, but they will be available to be answered and picked up again from the system that we have and be answered online later. Thank you. Good outcome, eh?
Are you going to have a Q&A? Do they want to?
A little bit, maybe one question. And then if everybody, we have one good question, maybe everybody have an opinion on it. And then we load the other questions on the internet and we'll...
Oh, you can do it all electronically.
Yeah, we can. Thank you so much for coming. It's, the turnout is amazing, eh? So there's an energy there that we can capture, I think.
Thomas, this is Trish.
Yes. There's a Facebook group down there. Link up to me on the Facebook group. I didn't put my email down there for good reason, otherwise it's not in there, but I see that down there. Okay. Well, on the help of all the others that are come before us.
Yeah, so
yeah.
Yes.
Fantastic. Good. Right, thank you, Kira. We would like to get the panel back together on the stage in a minute, so if you could please join us again in the hall, and then we will have the ability to have a question or two to all these wonderful speakers who've come from far away today to be with us. So if you'd be so kind to come back in, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the long journey. You were the longest journeying participant.
Hey, how are you?
Yeah, please take your seats so we have a chance to begin our session for questions and answers. Thank you very much. And on the screen is again the way to do this. You go to meet.ps/ocean. That should get you to the interface to post a question online. That will appear on the iPad up front. Or you can write your question on a piece of paper if that's more convenient for you. And also don't forget that this will carry on. We have a Facebook group. Whoops, it's gone again. Same as pushing buttons. There's a Facebook group that we formed, Coromandel Ocean Protection, where we hope to connect with everybody in the future going forward from after this day. And we hope to also be able to put the video of this evening on that as well. If Sam can put it back on there, that would be fantastic. Thank you. Right, Kira, if the speakers could also come, please, back to the stage, and we're inviting to join us on the speakers bench if there's space. If you can squeeze in Mike Barner from Legacy, who is the filmmaker from The Price of Fish, is here, and also want to acknowledge Tereng Isaias, who is here. No, it's not him. Tereng Isaias, look-alike anyhow. Tereng Isaias was there in the back somewhere, who is the man who put the Mototiti Marine Reserve group into motion and was very instrumental getting this going. He was in the audience. Not sure if he's still there. And if you could have Sue back on the panel as well for questions and answers. So, and chairing this discussion will be Pamela Greeley. Pamela Greeley from Coromandel, who agreed to be the chair of this session. And I believe we do have a few questions to get us started. So if I'll hand this microphone to Pam, and then what we'll do is there's another microphone, a loose one that can be handed around. So this will be Pam's, and I give the other one for Pamela. So here's a microphone to hand around to whoever is the one who picks up the ball on the... Give it to Joe.
Kia ora tātou. Ko Pamela toka ingoa. Thank you, Thomas. So I'm a member of a lot of environmental groups locally, a bit of a busybody. So Thomas said, come and help us out here today. I'm also conscious of the time. Thank you all for staying. I know we were due to finish around about 5. So I've got one question that is to everyone on the panel. So you'll all get a little bit of a turn to say. And for the Ollie and Mike, beg pardon. If you just introduce yourselves when it's your turn, that would be great. And so the question is, given the overwhelming evidence pointing to an overall decline in kai moana size and numbers, both locally and nationally, and given that everyone stands to benefit from further protection now, what are the proposals for future protection that currently hold the most support within your organisation or group?
Of this for everyone? Manage fishing.
Be the same for me. It'd be manage fisheries appropriately and responsibly.
It's got to be an overall reduction in take on all of our fisheries, and the inshore contact methods have to be eliminated. That's dredging and bottom trawling.
That's a ditto for me, but also you can add to that, we need an inshore fisheries management plan, and we need a plan, an overall plan for the whole of the Hauraki Gulf, a comprehensive one. There's a sea change one, there's a start, but we need to build on that and probably add, utilise the Hauraki Gulf Marine Park Act a little bit more. It is a legally recognised act, and I think there could be stronger policy and probably more additions to that act to ensure more protection for our fisheries.
I think more marine reserves. The debate might be where they should go or not, but just more marine reserves, I think, would make a lot of us understand something's happening.
Yeah, we have to support mana whenua and their aspirations. Right around the Gulf now, iwi and hapu are settling. They're ambitious for the future for their rangatahi, their young people, and their environment. And it's a duty upon us to support them in their aspirations. Thanks.
And I think it's about talking to one another, not about one another, and working together, and just respecting all those different knowledge sets. We will find a way forward, we can find a way forward, and when we do, imagine what we'll see in the Hauraki Gulf.
I think wearing my Hauraki Gulf Forum hat, the four goals that the forum set out in Alex's speech would be the aspiration there. For the regional council, I think it's too early to say what their collective view is, because they'll be waiting for what you guys have to say in terms of the coastal plan. So I think that's why I think the message I gave you earlier, if you need these changes to happen, you need to make a submission on that plan and convince them.
For me, it'd be active restoration, further marine protection, and sharing of data and ideas, and more forums and nights like this.
I'd hang on to that, Tim, because I'm going to ask you and Daryl the same question, and it's why is there such disparity in the data that you showed? Do we know what is likely contributing to that?
I'll go first. Basically, potentially different collection methods. We are surveying discrete areas, small areas. We have a long-term data set for all of those areas that go back to the 90s and further back. So we are surveying these areas time and time again. Whereas I'll let Daryl talk to his data and how they collect that. I'd just like to say we are working with the local fishermen in Lee. So we're collecting catch per unit effort and potting data within the reserves as well. So hopefully the two, moving forward, will be able to talk to each other in terms of like for like. So they're just basically at a real basic level, there's different data collection techniques. But I still stand by what we see in terms of our areas haven't come back to how they were back in the 90s, which would be an indication of, hey, the fishery's going well around these coastlines that we're surveying. And I would like to make the point too, is we're not surveying right across Cray too.
Thank you. Daryl?
We've been surveying all of the areas that have been fished over 3 decades worth of data, and the team up at the Lee Marine Reserve is surveying an area that hasn't been fished. So there's a difference straight away. I mean, I've got greater spatial coverage, I've got more detailed catch effort information over a longer period of time. Never denied that there has been a decline in rock lobster stock abundance in Cray too. The industry has been right at the forefront of trying to highlight the difficulties that they've seen with some of the management decisions that have been made by various ministries over many years. And I briefly mentioned the industry's efforts to voluntarily reduce the commercial catch targets because they just did not have confidence in the numbers that the ministry was producing. Now, there was an audit done of the method of obtaining the numbers that the ministry was using, and the fishermen's caution was vindicated by that. There's been a really significant reduction in the total allowable commercial catch, which was made on the 1st of April 2018, and all of the data, the ministry data, the industry data, all of the data confirms that there has been a measurable increase in stock abundance since that time. And that's why I said from the outset, you manage fishing, from abundance all benefits flow. And if you get that right, everything else will come right, as Sir Michael said, let nature take its course.
And I have a follow-up question for you, Daryl. Do you believe there's any need to improve lobster stocks? And has the industry been adversely affected by lower than ideal stocks in any of the areas that you work in? And then a further question, what triggers would need to be observed to consider a self-imposed moratorium or a reduction in catch for you guys?
Well, the triggers that were observed back in 2015 was just the life experience of fishermen observing what wasn't coming up in their pots, realising that there was something wrong despite the science, the outcome of the science that was being generated at the time, and that was the incentive for them to stop fishing. They stopped fishing before the end of one fishing year, and then they reduced their catch target by 50 tonne in each of the 2 successive seasons. That gave time to do a new stock assessment, again contracted by the Ministry for Primary Industries, and that stock assessment confirmed that a number of the assumptions in previous stock assessments were over-optimistic, and hence a very restrictive, went from 200 tonne total allowable commercial catch to 80 tonne total allowable commercial catch. Now that's a pretty big heave for someone who's in business. I'm not saying we were catching 200 tonne, but we were catching 150. So the industry has not only been responsive to their own observations and taken the initiative, they've been proactive in this. They haven't been passengers or victims. They've actively encouraged the changes that were required.
Would anyone on the panel like to add their opinions?
So, sorry Pamela, you asked me to introduce myself. So I'm Oliver Wilson, I work for Fisheries Inshore New Zealand. So I'm a sector representative for inshore fishers and quota holders. And so the bit that I would add on to that is I think we have a problem that we've got data collection in data silos. And so, for example, I see the information that Tim provided around snapper, then I see a recent report which just came out from Ministry of Primary Industries that says that snapper's gone up over 100% in Hauraki Gulf from fisheries independent surveys. And so, but this is the issue. If we have different science telling us different things, or science done in silos, and I go back to Sue's point, which I thought was a really valid one, is that we need to find a collective way of coming together and talking about these issues and bringing all the science at the same time. And another example that was being talked about today is that from an education perspective, I'm sure lots of you don't understand or realise that from a commercial scallops fishers, they actually manage the fishery to a much finer scale than required by government. And so they're farming the areas, moving around, and they're also collecting data for that, and we would want that data to be incorporated into decision making. So it's about breaking down the silos and improving the discussions between stakeholders.
I'll move on to the next question then. Actually, we've had quite a few questions about commercial fishery against recreational fishing, and the question that was asked several times was, what percentage of the catch that's taken in our area is commercial, and where does it go to?
The strictly accurate answer is, for rock lobsters, the strictly accurate answer is we do not know, because the non-commercial catches are not adequately audited or monitored or measured. For the commercial catch, I know down to the last kilogram, because each individual fisherman has a limit imposed by what's called an annual catch entitlement. The catches are landed here in Whitianga, transported to Auckland either for the domestic market, and there is quite a strong domestic market for rock lobsters, particularly in the hospitality trade, which has suffered since the COVID lockdowns. And we still export live rock lobsters, predominantly live rock lobsters. Our main client is China, but there are other Asian customers as well. So this year, or the most recent fishing year, ended on the 31st of March. There were just over 80 tonnes of rock lobsters landed out of the Cray 2 fishery. About 36% of that was taken out of the 906 statistical area. So you're looking at basically Whangamata to the top of the peninsula, and those fish were all high quality live export product.
Thank you. Anyone else want to comment on that? Okay, then I have a question for Joe. How can iwi better reconcile preservation efforts with commercial interest in aquaculture?
Well, with aquaculture, and you all know that I'm trying to get a mussel spat farm going out there at Fofo. I see aquaculture as a positive in terms of leaving our wild stock or resting our wild stock or protecting our wild stock from further degradation. I see degradation. The commercial guys might see, oh, it's all great and all fuzzy and warm out there, but I don't think so. From a Māori perspective, like I'll give you an example. I don't think Ngāti He's seen a crayfish on its table for probably the last since I've been back anyway, 22 years. The Hauraki, you go across to Hauraki over to our other marae, you never see crayfish on the table. They just can't afford to go out there and get it for a start. They certainly don't, it's part of our manaakitanga, as for our manuhiri, to put crayfish on the table would be an absolute, that'd be top of the, one of the best kaimoana you can get to. But we don't see any of that. We see it going past our whare. We don't see any of that. It's a high-end fish. We can't afford the big boats to go out there and go and get this stuff. So, and I'm hearing tons and tons and tons, and that's scary for us and scary for me. And I don't know how much quota the Trust Board might have. I'm not aware of those figures, but in terms of aquaculture, I see it as being a positive, and at least it's exploitative, yes, but I see at least 15% at least being released from these aquaculture sites back into the wild, and that compensates in some way to improve, in a small way, our wild stocks out there. At the moment, the extractive, all of the extraction that comes out of the ocean is off wild stock. It's not off aquaculture yet, right? Okay, we've got mussels on the other side, and we've got oysters on the oyster farms, but now we need to look at, and I'd love to see Cawthron, I'd love to see those scientific, and I know they're working on it, but it's just doesn't make economic sense for us to go out there and farm and get into aquaculture like we would like to take some of the pressure off the commercial take out of our harbours and oceans. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, there's another question for everyone to answer, because I know some of you haven't said much. And it's, I'm going to see if I can frame this slightly more positively than, are some things too broken to recover on their own? Have we gone past the tipping point? The assumption that nature left alone will recover. Is that right? And particularly if we start here and work back, because they want particularly Tim to talk about the need for active restoration efforts. But if everyone could just say what they think, are we too far gone, or is there still time for us to recover?
I don't think there's too far gone. I'll read you something from the literature that brought us all together today. That Tikapa Moana is under threat from numerous factors, including population and tourism growth around the Gulf, increased sedimentation, overfishing, pollution, invasive pests and climate change. These factors have degraded marine habitats, upset the natural biodiversity and balance, and significantly reduced kelp forest, shellfish beds, and the number and size of fish, to name just a few. Deal with all of that stuff and you can make a difference. Closing an area to fishing doesn't deal with all of that stuff.
I refuse to believe that it's gone too far, because for my children and everyone else's whānau, why would we accept that? So the premise of that question, I disagree to believe it's gone too far. I think we have to recognise the holistic nature of it, the multitude of impacts that we have to address. And I've heard from all the presenters about the complexity of the situation. It's no silver bullet was referenced. And I think we have to be very clear about what management we're setting up, what the management objective is, and then how you're going to monitor that and manage that into the future. We also have to be very cognizant about people's rights and interests across all stakeholders. In terms of the specific, I think the question is asking about what active management you could do, and that's probably, we're talking more in the habitats, regeneration of habitats. the Fisheries Act allows that from a fisheries management context. The Fisheries Act actually has a whole section around habitats of particular significance, so that's covered in fisheries management. And then I think there's a really important mountains to sea approach that we need to address, because from a fisheries perspective, we're the end users, and so we need to work with further up to the mountains to make sure that we're addressing all of those factors as we move forward. Holistic approach.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of other factors that are affecting our fisheries, coming from down the Awa and from our other impacts. But if we are to talk about what we're all here about today, we've only got to look back 100 years or 3 generations to know that my grandmother used to collect crayfish out of rock pools at low tide, and her paua, and that's only a couple of generations back. When we talk about a return of abundance, if we've got greater stocks, and we have world-leading information telling us that we should be managing our fish stocks at B50, not at B40, 30 or 20, which is 50% of original biomass. If we raise those fish levels up and we don't target individual fish, we treat each environment as being an ecosystem, so it's an ecosystem-based management. You can't take the snapper out and take the crayfish out and not expect the kinnabarrens to start. So you need to look at things, as we talked about holistically, about an entire ecosystem. But we need to see greater numbers of those animals, and we need the nurseries back. And that's when I come back to that the dredging and bottom trawling. Apart from the carbon release that's causing to environmental change, it's completely destroying the nurseries for all of our fish species.
Kia ora, well said, well said. Yeah, there are other external factors, definitely, and if you, I didn't mention in my kōrero when I opened, I wanted to speak about things like our national trade agreements that we have with other countries, the dumping of bilges and outside the 20 mile, well, we think they're dumping them outside the 20. They certainly will almost definitely find their way back on our shores. There's also our immigration policy. What are we, around 5 million at the moment? When I left back in 78, it was around 3. So it's gone to 5. And after this whole COVID thing's over, well, it never will be, they say, but you can bet how many jets are going to be landing in Auckland Airport, and the population increase is going to, I would say, climb rather quickly. That therefore putting more pressure on fisheries. Of course, other cultures don't share the same Kiwiana cultures that we have, and don't understand why we do what we do as Kiwis. Quite frankly, I can't say that they wouldn't give a damn, but they certainly weren't brought up to respect our kaimoana and our harbours, our streams, like we are today. Like, I'm talking maybe 1 or 2 generations back onwards. But the new Kiwis coming in don't know. They come from war-torn countries. They come from exploited environments. You just got to look at the pictures and it tells the story. And they're coming into, that they need an immigration policy that takes them through some sort of an induction that tells them, you shouldn't do this, you will not do that. There are things we just do not do here in New Zealand, Aotearoa. Right. That's another big factor, is that population growth. I think the Crown's looking at Crown, local government as well, they need to be able to raise a rate that's going to cover for infrastructure in certain towns. And where do they get that from? By increasing populations. So we're into encouraging more people to come over and be part of us. And so with that comes, well, I think it needs to come with a little bit of education when they get here. No doubt their children, once they go to, first, second generation, go to school, they soon learn our way. and this is how we do it in Aotearoa. So in terms of those sorts of influences as well, our trade agreements, of course, we sign up to these trade pacts. You see them come through from the Crown all the time, and you can bet China's saying, we'll trade with you as long as if you let us fish in your waters and stuff like that, And then we're bound by these trade agreements to honour our side of the bargain. And the wheeling and dealing that's done, probably by those ministries to boost our trade with these super economies like China, and others. China being the biggest one on the block, the big cat on the block at the moment. It has an effect all the way through, right down to what we're trying to do to save out there as our fisheries and our environment, and why we're so fortunate to enjoy what we enjoy today. Kia ora.
We're getting late on time. My only point would be that things do recover. I made that point for what I've been watching out on Mercury Island. That's land-based activity, but there gives me a lot of confidence that the land does recover. The sea will recover also. We're stuck with a real problem, and for those of you who used to read Lovelock a long time ago, James Lovelock, and all his theories on Gaia and the ages of Gaia and the revenge of Gaia, it's still quite scary stuff today. And David Attenborough's taken over, thank God, getting the message across to everybody, and a wonderful, wonderful message. I saw something the other night. He wasn't there, he was voiceover, but 4 scientists were talking, and about 60-year-old scientist guy was saying, we've got to remember, and if you look back how many people were on the planet when we landed on the moon, 4 billion, now we're coming up to 8 billion, you go the same again, you're 15 or 16 billion, and this man put it very succinctly, right now, our activity on this planet, we're using up 1.5 planets. Now, we can't, if we go double our population, we're going to need 3 planets. We haven't got 1.5, we've only got 1. So I think our concern for our kids and our grandkids has to come back to these basics, and not get lost in some of these backwards and forwards. I think that's the challenge. Don't know the answers, but I think we have to have a high level of awareness, and communities have to be much more demanding as to the activities they want to see happen and what they want to see change, and the answers they want, not to be blinded by science and not to have lots of lobby groups and everything else. Just get the information in front of us. We'll respond with what we think we'd like to see happen, and then we want to make it happen.
Yes, the answer is yes. We need to actively restore as well, and we're lucky tonight because a person who's leading some of the most innovative, groundbreaking and exciting restoration work in the Gulf is in the room, and I'm going to ask him to stand up just briefly. This is Peter Miles, who's with us tonight. Peter leads an organisation called Revive Our Gulf. They are leading the mussel restoration work in many parts of the Gulf. The work that they are doing is so important to the health of the future of Te Kapa, of the Gulf. And if you're at all interested after this, please do Google Revive Our Gulf, have a chat to Peter, get involved in that work because it is super cool, and there's a chance to do mussel restoration right around the Gulf. Thanks.
Yes, it will recover. We've watched even what happens with the small trials that we've done out around the noises, and you definitely see results. And I think probably marine environments will recover at different rates depending on what you start with. So if you start with an area of high biodiversity, things will be attracted back in there faster than in some of the more degraded areas. But you get that spillover, and you'll start seeing an upward spiral, and especially if we look after our shellfish, because they don't only provide habitat, but they filter, they do all sorts of things. So, the marine environment can help us clean up what we discharge off the land, as well as providing habitat. It's multi-purpose, and you start that upward spiral, and people start to see things recover. And that positivity breeds positivity. And you look at somewhere like Zealandia and how the impact of that has spilled over around Wellington, and it's sparked all these interest groups and people who think, yeah, look, you can do it, it's working. And now we just have to move that into the marine environment. And I think we can absolutely make change. And by educating, by letting our younger people see this change and be part of it, and working together transparently and sharing our knowledge, yeah, it can happen.
Thanks. Look, I'm a wee bit of ambivalent on this one. To Sue's point, I think if we look at what's happened on land, then we can be really, really encouraged. Zealandia is one example. I went out to Great Mercury and was hosted by Sir Michael, and there was some sugar water outside his home, and there were literally scores of bellbirds and tuis after the efforts that have been made there, coming down. Yeah. So, at that level, I think, if we can repeat that sort of effort, but I think it's a matter of scale. So if you think about how much marine protection we have, I think it's less than 0.5%. And on land, with the conservation estate and national parks, it's, I don't know, it's 20 or 30%. So I think there's still an issue of scale. The reason I'm ambivalent is because I have some concern about our sense of entitlement in terms of climate change. And there are tipping points for climate change that I think we're not really anywhere near addressing. And the problem with the tipping point is once you've reached it, it's already happened, and it's in the rear vision mirror. So I think we have to really, really get stuck in now and make a really good, good effort on it.
So yeah, it's a big yes from me. If we contrast land-based restoration versus marine, don't have the sums, but there'll be millions and millions spent on revegetating waterways in New Zealand, especially around here too. That's kicking off, which is really encouraging. In the marine environment, depending where you are, it's just a simple case of stopping an activity, e.g. fishing, and it will bounce back, and we've seen that multiple times. There's different trajectories of where it, for example, Lee took 15 years, Hahe similar, Poor Nights, 6 years. It was, the abundance was huge, So you've got to be realistic about where you're doing it. Other things need a kickstart. There's a lot of work at the moment going around looking at how do we manage urchin barrens. Can we hand remove them? There's a lot of them out there, So that's an expensive exercise because getting those big predators back in there is even a bigger exercise, in my opinion. But yeah, there's always hope, and we've got to be realistic. We've got to be expected to fail as well, okay? Because we are trying to get the marine environmental parts of it back to how it was 100 years ago, but the habitats, particularly the soft sediments, have changed so much, So I think we need to be prepared to fail, and we need to not so much celebrate that failure, but learn from it, And I always encourage you to go snorkeling in the Hahe Marine Reserve, for those of you who don't, and you can just see what happens when we just give things a breathing space. Okay.
So, final question, and on a positive note, it's great to see so many rangatahi getting involved in conservation, and the question from one of them is, what can we 15-year-olds do to help marine life?
That's a fantastic question, and we've actually had some experience with rangatahi, and I sort of wanted to relate it back to the previous question too, is that we need to work together with mana whenua in terms of a blending of how we do restoration and how traditional restoration happens. And I think for rangatahi, to get them involved, or even youth of Aotearoa, who are going to experience, if we don't do anything now, they're going to experience, I don't know actually what they'll experience, but it's not going to be too good. So rangatahi, young New Zealanders, let's get them involved in these and get their hands dirty and get them involved in these active restoration programs. And I think that's probably another conversation, but it would be something that we could drive through this group here. There's a number of things that we can do, whether it would be helping remove kina, looking at kina quality from a traditional and a Western science point of view. I guess the ocean is limitless in terms of these initiatives. So, and I think we don't want to fail our youth. We need to bring them along with the journey and make them feel part of it as well.
In terms of youth, I think I'm much more positive than my previous comments. I'd say for youth, do what you're doing with the climate strike. That's the answer.
Yeah, I was going to say the same, lobbying. I mean, you know, it's their future that's at stake, and it's our job to make sure that they understand so that they can lobby successfully, that they have the education and the knowledge to lobby successfully.
There was a group of students at Long Bay School who 2 years ago went down to their local rock pools and asked a very simple question as to why they couldn't find anything in them. And they got active, and among 20 students, they kicked off a TV show. They got a 4,000 signature petition to Parliament, and they've now got a proposal before MPs to extend the Long Bay Marine Reserve to include their local beach of Waiheke at Tor Bay on Auckland's North Shore. The power of youth is limitless, and I just encourage whoever that 15-year-old is to get stuck in. Thank you.
For a lot of the projects that I see and watch and talk about, volunteers are the key to it. A lot of this can be achieved with volunteers. I did a count before I came here from the first, from the November, December year till the end of May. We had staying on Mercury Island, working, doing all sorts of work, young and old volunteers, no age restriction. 1,980 volunteer nights over that's the last 6 months, not the last year, just these last 6 months. 1,980 people volunteered to come out and work on different projects on Mercury Island. And they're mainly young people, and that's where they're learning, and that's where they're getting passionate also.
At MBAS, I think they have a Marine Academy for the kids there. We've got Daryl and doing great work with youth as well, and he's got the little sea cadets, I think, as well. You know, there's the kids are extremely important. There's always part of our kōrero is about succession planning and who we hand on the mantles to, and who we hand on our pai to and our marae, who's going to run our marae. You know, we have waiata that goes back, mā waira, you know, who is going to take our place once we're gone. But, you know, the kids, when they go out with their dads and their mums and they go out fishing, you know, they are the conscience that's on that boat. You know, they'll say, why, Dad, throw that big one back. You know, they're the breeders. They're the ones who have all the eggs. So put it back, you know, and Dad goes, oh, well, okay. You know, they're the conscience. And, you know, you don't throw that old bird cage, you know, put a nylon back over the side. You don't, you know, certain things you just don't do. And the kids are the conscience of their parents when they go out fishing. It's those small things, you know, that our kids do and keep us to. And then they learn that through school, and they learn that through their mates. They learn that through their own little networks. You know, they carry these computers, telephones, these computers around with them. So there's more technology in our phones than I think there was the Apollo 13 or something like that. But they're connected and much more aware, more environmentally aware. And they are, as we keep saying, they're the future, and we've got to keep working on that as part of our legacy, you know, leaving behind a better place for them. Kia ora.
I think it's wonderful to theorise about us leaving a better planet or a better environment for our kids. But if it's up to all us adults, I think a lot of us are really stuck in our ways. The wonderful thing, as Joe says, is the kids have the most influence you could ever imagine. They're being taught really good stuff at school. They're getting those morals and values. My parents would never have given up smoking if it wasn't for the pressure we kids put on them to stop. There was no way it would have ever happened except for us. And I think we've got to give credit to our kids. Yes, we need to work at it, but I think our kids are going to do more for this, for our environment than we could ever believe.
I think most of the panel have described it pretty aptly. I think we're all here because we're focusing on the future for all of our children. And so I think it's key that we never lose sight of that and don't lose sight of the fact that it's not talking at them, it's talking with them, and so empowering them to continue like they've done with the climate change, to actually empower and engage in the subjects. But I think it's also important for us as the adults to make sure that we're giving them the information and the tools to access information if they want it, so they can focus it, but not do it in a way that we might like to see, do it in a way that in media formats that they really want to get hold of and to become impassioned, so they can be the next fisherman, they can be the next environmentalist, because we're going to need children in all walks of life to have a really great future, and I think it's entirely possible. We just need to empower them.
So, ngā mihi to the panel. We've enjoyed your thoughtful korero. We've really appreciated it. We've appreciated all of you staying behind. If we haven't answered your question, we will be putting the answers to those on the Facebook page in the next few days. So thank you all very much, and I'm going to hand over to Thomas.
Yeah, thank you again to the panel. Thank you so much for your kind contributions. It's fantastic to have you here today and to be able to listen to your wisdom and to your wonderful opinions and your great spirit. That we can do, that we can actually solve this. And I'm in education. I'm a teacher here at Mercury Bay Area School. I'm currently working on a PhD in climate education at the University of Waikato. And I'm doing this because I do believe that education is the transformational vehicle that will hopefully save us from ourselves. There's a very good educational writer in New Zealand who said that education must stop being a vehicle for cultural reproduction and must become a vehicle for cultural transformation, and I strongly believe that. So with that, I think we'll call it a night, and we'll hope to be able to be addressing all your questions online. Again, there is the Facebook group that's again there on the back screen there. We can't have it here right now, I think. And Coromandel Ocean Protection, if you join that Facebook group, you'll be able to see probably also the recording of this evening if it all went well. And you'll be able to then engage with questions with us. And I think, with this, I want to also thank my team. Sharon Malcolm, can you stand up, please? Sharon, without your great help, this wouldn't have been happening. And also Pam, Evan, and all of us, and Anna over there in the kitchen and so forth, and your Gus, your good help as well. So it's a good team in town of people who want to bring this manner forward. And yes, the one more question there. Oh yes, sorry, I forgot to ask you. We have put we've paid for this wonderful hall, which was not too much, and we paid for some advertising and other bits and pieces. If you were so kind to put a bit of money in the koha box, that'll help us to defray it. It wouldn't sit on our own pockets. But your presence is the present for us. So that you came was the most important part. But if you want to put a bit of money in the box, that will be helpful again as well. And so, does anybody in the audience want to give a karakia for the end? Otherwise, I'll give it to Joe, but he's been speaking a lot today. So, anybody in the audience want to give a karakia, like a young person or a rangitai, or somebody who wants to give us a karakia to close this off from the audience? Otherwise, I'll give it to Uncle Joe. Anybody? Pick somebody up. Give it somebody the karakia. No. All right. Anyway, okay. I'll give it to Joe again to close the evening off first.
Kia ora everybody. Ko tēnei karakia motunga mo tātou, te whakakapi o tātou he kei konei no reire ka mihi atu ki o koutou. Kei konei ngā māngai he kei konei e rongai i o tātou kaupapa. Kia koe Thomas, ka mihi atu kia koe anō rā. e koutou mā, no reira tēnā koutou katoa me ino i tātai. Ai o matu i te matu i te rani. I te tautoko ki te awhia mātou i rungi o tātou whakaro konei. Ki te whakatūpatu i a mātou ki rungi a ngā tātou hōki, ki o tātou kainga, ki o tātou whare, i o tātou whānau. E no reira i mui a koe taronga rawa, he turu whakamau i ka tīna. Hau mie huie, tai ki e. Kia ora tātou everybody. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Kia ora.